Okay, I'm going to call us to order here. This is the City Council special meeting for Sunday, March 17th, 2019. Madam City Clerk, would you call the roll, please?
Mayor Christy Malchow.
Present.
Deputy Mayor Karen Moran.
Present.
Councilmember Tom Hornish.
Present.
Councilmember Jason Ritchie.
Here.
Councilmember Chris Ross.
Present.
Councilmember Pamela Stewart.
Here.
Councilmember Ramiro Valderrama.
Present.
Okay, Madam City Clerk, we do have a quorum. Councilmember Ross, would you lead us in the Pledge of Allegiance, please? I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Okay, to entertain a motion for approval of the agenda.
So moved.
Second.
Okay, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Okay, seeing none, all those in favor say aye.
Aye.
Aye. Opposed? Okay, by a vote of 7-0, we have approval of the agenda. Our next order of business is interviews for city manager candidates. And our first candidate is Rick, and I'm going to apologize if I ruin this, Rudametkin?
Very good.
Yes. Okay, good. So I am obviously Christy Malchow. I'm the mayor for Sammamish, and I'm going to have us ask around the table to introduce ourselves, just for those that are in the audience and home watching as well. So let's start down at this end with Councilmember Stewart, please.
Great. I would like to request, though, that we not start the 50 minutes then if we're doing introductions.
No, yeah.
Okay, thank you. My name's Pam Stewart, and I'm a city council member. I'm not sure what other information we need to provide. Happy St. Patrick's Day. I don't know. There
I
we
think
go.
that's good. It's just introductions.
Karen Moran, and I am also a council member.
With a frog today.
Council member.
Hey, Rick, how you doing? Jason Ritchie, good to see you again.
Good council, you too.
Thanks.
And Tom Hornish, council member.
Romero Valderrama Amayo, council member.
Great. So we have a series of 12 questions we would like to ask you. You have 50 minutes to which we can answer these questions. So keep that in mind as you answer the question. There is a clock over here to keep you on track. Okay. So with that, I'll begin by asking, pardon?
I have just a quick question on the process.
Yes.
Do we have to stick to these 12, or can we ask our own question as long as we consistently ask the other candidates the same question?
I think that's fair, unless
Yep.
anybody else has an issue with that.
Okay, thank you.
Very good. Okay, so I will begin. Please provide the council with a brief review of your background and experience and why you are the best candidate for this job.
Thank you, Mayor, Deputy Mayor, council members, and good afternoon. My name is Rick Rudametkin, and I'm currently the county manager for Eddy County, New Mexico. I have over 24 years experience in municipal government and private sector engineering company experience. I started out as an inspector with the engineering company, went into construction management, basically utility project coordination. I saw a need at that particular time for some funding issues that I saw weren't being appropriated right. So what I did is I decided to go into the public sector, and that's when I started my career with government officially. I've been with engineering company, 2 cities and 2 counties. And I'm currently on a number of boards and committees at my particular county, vice chairman and chairman on a number of those committees. And it really helps our situation down there in Eddy County, especially with our industry the way it is and getting appropriations for housing, roads, amenities, because we are a booming economy down there. So with that, Mayor, that's my brief.
Very good. So we'll start down at this end of the dais if that's okay. Councilmember Stewart.
So why do you want to leave your current job, and why are you interested in serving as the city manager for Sammamish?
Okay. For me, it's a quality of life issue. Expecting new challenges is something I look forward to. Sammamish has great reviews on a number of things. Great place to live, surrounding area, beautiful area, challenges, great schools. And so those are the kind of things that my wife and I and daughter have really talked about and really want in our lives going forward. I have a good job where I'm at, but I want another challenge. I want another opportunity, and my 7-year-old daughter deserves every amenity she can have. And Sammamish definitely provides that for her and provides that for my wife. We are not short-timers, we are long-termers, and I expect to be here a long time, and I'm very interested in being your next city manager because I really think I could help and I could really, really get some things done here. So those are some of the things that have drawn me to Sammamish and to the Washington area, and I am very happy to be in this position right now.
Deputy Mayor Moran.
My voice hasn't got a whole lot better from last night. Tell us about your core values and how those values determine how you will manage our city.
Core values. I think the biggest thing for me is integrity. So I have a certification which is called CAPE, which is the Certified Advocate for Public Ethics. And what that basically is, it's a set of about 9 to 11 classes that really teach and emphasize how important it is to be ethical, transparent, and honest in public service. I've tried to dictate my life and challenge myself in my life to adhere to those policies and those thoughts. So core values for me are extremely important. Strategic values for me are extremely important. So I'd say, to answer the question, I'd say integrity would be at the top, and then you can add honesty, and you can add transparency, communicative, all the rest of it underneath it. So that's kind of how I live my life. I try to have a very high standard for myself, to the point sometimes where sometimes I can't meet that standard, but it still sets the bar. So there's never a complacency side because I'm always reaching and always performing and always doing to achieve that goal. So for me, that is the core value, and that's what I bring here to Sammamish. You're welcome.
Councilmember Ross.
Thank you. What are the 2 most significant accomplishments in your career, and what was your role in those accomplishments?
There's been a few. I'll give you one as county manager for a county in Modoc. I went there as the director of public works. I got promoted to county manager. When I got there, the county was, let's say, in the hole, if you will, in the treasury, about $13 million. The reason for that wasn't embezzlement, wasn't, I think, for the wrong reason. It was to sustain a hospital in a very rural community. So good reason to do it, bad use of funds because it's illegal to use treasury funds, restricted treasury funds, to balance the budget or to basically fund an enterprise fund, which was the hospital. What that does, it takes all the money out of the treasury and then you can't focus on doing projects, you can't focus on staff, succession planning, you can't focus on community development, because you don't really have the money because you've used the money in another spot. What we tried to do is put a revenue bond in to replace the treasury at the order of the state controller, attorney general, and the treasurer's office. So we tried that for almost a year. And the biggest thing was if we didn't restore the treasury toward the end of the fiscal year, we were going to have to basically go insolvent because we had no money to pay our bills. So basically we had our auditor, myself, and the bankruptcy attorney in front of the board, and we said, if you don't let us dry period loan money, dry period loaning is legal as long as you replace those funds after the fiscal year is over. Well, that's the problem, is they could not replace the funds, and therefore it became illegal. So we said, we will go insolvent unless you do that, and we worked very hard to provide all the information. The board approved that 3-2, so we barely snuck in there, and we did not go bankrupt or insolvent. That was a great accomplishment for me and for the county and for our staff. Another accomplishment is where I am currently in Eddy County. We have a very vast oil and gas industry. And the issue becomes when residents in your community see trucks, see dust, hear noises, and smell bad things, they get a little bit annoyed, if you will, and they want resolution to those fixes. We never really had anybody in place to do that. So we finally, after about 8 months of trying, 8 months of reporting, we finally hired an oil and gas liaison / PIO to help with that problem. And what that did is it developed the communication between the oil industry, the county, and the community to allow basically the things to get fixed. So if a resident has a complaint or has an issue, they would go ahead and call the oil and gas liaison at my agency. Oil and gas liaison would get a hold of the industry would call the resident and get this issue resolved. Huge for us down there. We've never had that before. Other states use liaisons quite a bit. So those, I think, are the two accomplishments that I think were pretty successful, and they have helped the community in many ways.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Okay, how you doing, Rick? I get the fun question for us here. How do you manage, something we talked about yesterday, I think a little bit, how do you manage a city with a council that is at times, I'll add in, deeply divided and at times dysfunctional?
Okay. Okay, Counselor. You see that a lot in a lot of agencies. I've been in 4 different agencies. There's never the perfect board because everybody has opinions, everybody has values, everybody has ideas, and everybody has vision, which is a good thing. That's how you move the agency forward with ideas like that. The problem becomes when there's arguing or when there's confrontation about which way is the best way to go. So my role in that is to come to the elected officials and talk. Let's say you have a certain opinion, and my recommendation may be different than that. So I want to sit down with you and talk to you about how you view your vision or your idea, and this is maybe some data that I collected, and let me show you the data. And maybe you'll see that that makes more sense, and maybe you'll change your idea, which will go along with the group, or vice versa. And so let's say there's 2 of you, and each have a difference in opinion. I would like to sit down with 2. It does not violate any Open Meetings Act. It does not violate a rolling quorum. But what it does, it provides information, maybe information that I have or information that you have, that you can tell me to change my mind and say, no, this is not what it is. Look at this. You know what? That's a better idea. Let's go with that. That collaboration, that communication makes everybody adhere together. If there is 7 or 8 different, 7 plus me, 8 different visions, okay, we kind of got to narrow those down and push our city forward, because if we're going so many different directions, it's hard to focus on a couple of them to really move that forward. Yeah. Communicate, having a consensus with the council is extremely important. So if the vote, say, is divided, and the ones that did not vote for a particular issue, it would be nice, and it is nice, when they go along with the majority to provide this consensus on the board. And therefore, it provides kind of like the leadership, the stern, who's driving the ship, right? And that gets disseminated down to me as the manager, and therefore staff has basically a direct idea of what needs to be done and can provide that information, and then we can bring that information back to the council so they can make a calculated, great decision to move it forward.
Follow up real quick. What happens if you don't get there? How many, do you keep going back? Do you,
yes.
What's your, and what's been your history with that?
I like to consider myself a don't give up type of person. Okay. Until, maybe somebody needs to beat me over the head or something. But I mean, I've always wanted to do that. I've had some agents, I've been in some agencies where we had really tough decisions. Yeah. And like that revenue bond I was talking about in the previous question, it took us a year and a half. The board never approved it. Well, we tried and we tried and we tried and we tried. However, they approved paying themselves back, which was a huge issue before, when they didn't want to pay themselves back and had no money in the treasury. Right. So we didn't get this, but we got this. And it still was providing money back into the treasury, so it still was a win. Right. So we just keep trying and we keep trying, and if it doesn't work, we'll give you different information. We'll try other ways, we'll try other values, other people, and try to get that information to you so you can make that decision.
Thank you.
All right, I'm going to take a page from Councilmember Valderrama's and kind of go off script a little bit, but it's kind of basically for everybody up here, number 7. But it's a 2-part question, Rick.
Okay.
I'd like to have 2 examples from your current position, one both when they were controversial issues, one when it was a good result, one when it was a bad result, and what you learned and how you would apply that here.
Okay. So 2 examples, one good but one bad result. Okay. Most recent. Bad result to the staff. So about 2 years ago, we put in a 4-10 schedule, which is basically you work 8 to 5, 8 hours a day, 5 days a week. Staff wanted to do a different schedule. So they asked me if I would represent and support them and take it to the board. I said, great, I would do that. Took 2 years to get it together and 2 board meetings to get it passed. Because it's a little bit controversial, right? So you work 7 to 6, 4 days a week. So we put that in place. It was in place a year and a half. We just had 2 new commissioners elected, January 1st in our county. They were running on, we want to put the county back 8 to 5, 5 days a week. So staff was a little bit excited because they didn't want to give up their 3-day weekends, and they can go to the doctor on Friday. There's a lot of benefits. But there's also benefits to being open 5 days a week. At the time when we did it, we were busy. Today, we're twice as busy. So it makes more sense to be open 5 days a week. So everybody was on pins and needles, and about the second meeting, I got a call from one of the new commissioners. Can you put the schedule back on? Yes, sir, I'll put the schedule back on. We put it back on, and it was a 3-2 vote to go back to 5/8. We explained how important the 410s are, the elected officials, because I have 5 elected officials plus 5 elected commissioners. So diplomacy is real important. They came up and spoke. We're not going back. We're going to stay on 410. So there's a little bit of controversy about, well, maybe lawsuits should be put, and it kind of got a little bit carried away. So I kind of stepped in. That's my job, and I kind of calmed everything down. And by the time it was done, we lost our 410s. Staff was not real happy with that. So that, to me, was a loss. But we're doing well. Everybody's kind of working with it and getting over it. So I see that's a loss. One particular, I think I talked about it, was the oil and gas liaison. That was a huge success for us. And I keep going back to that because I can't emphasize enough how important that is for our community and for our county. We also got another good outcome was the sheriff's department needed deputies, and he wanted to raise the salaries of the deputies. He wanted to raise the salaries of the deputies 30% to compete with the agencies around. It's a good idea, good idea. However, other staff was like, well, you raised 30 here, what happens to us, right? Because it's got to be fair across the board. So it was a real big controversy on that. We explained about public safety and how important and in trying to get good people. So by the time we were done, the sheriff got 10%, and then the staff, we redid the pay plan, they got 10%, and everything across the board was even and everybody was happy. The sheriff will bring back the remainder of 20% this year during the budget process. But it's a good thing because we got a little, and then he'll bring it back and probably get some more. And it's just an ongoing effort. But that whole thing was, to me, was a good thing for public safety and a good thing for where we are in our community, because we're in a drug traffic zone and coming up from Juarez, Mexico. And so it's a huge deal for us to have public safety out and about. And so to me, that was a great win for us.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Thank you for coming in for this process.
Thank you.
Most, if not all of you, had cited to me concerns on economic development. Having seen our community and our plans and talking to staff, how do you manage its accomplishment in our city?
I read a lot about this in Sammamish. Obviously, it's all tied in with the GMA, the Growth Management Act, and obviously with the comprehensive plan, and obviously you're all talking about concurrency right now. With that being said, part of the 7 goals that Larry had brought and that we got a chance to look at, one of those goals had emphasized livability in Sammamish. So I want to kind of take that word livability and tie it all in, because for a place to be livable, you have to have so many things in place. And so people have to have amenities. People have to have a way to get around. People want good schools. People want services for their agency, from their agency. People want to know that economic development is being managed properly, that there's transportation fixes coming, that there's recreation to do, parks, trails, bike trails, that type of thing. Ride motorcycles, good roads to ride motorcycles. That all ties into economic development, because what's the best development for Sammamish? Obviously, we are a bedroom community. Can we put more commercial in? Will that help our situation? Will it help the livability of where we're at? Will it help revenue? Sustainable revenue for the years to come? Will it provide a better service? So those are the type of things I think that we need to look at and we need to continue to look at. Obviously, we have a town center project, phase 1 and phase 2. We need to continue to look at that and probably look at where we're going to be when the population increases, because it is. We heard Microsoft might add thousands more people, and where are they going to live? Probably a lot of them will live here, so we have to prepare for that type of thing. So I think all those things that I said, transportation plan, transportation improvement plan, comprehensive plan. I read the economic development strategy where it basically talked about facts of what Sammamish is. That's good information moving forward to where we're going to be. So I think all that together ties into the economic development and kind of the way we need to look at it in the future.
Thank you.
You don't mind if I start here, and then I'll jump in the middle of it instead of going first again. So, Councilmember Stewart.
Oh. What do you do when your views and those of your staff differ from those of the governing body as a whole?
Okay.
I think you may have touched on this once or twice already. But
The biggest thing with that is communication. Staff has, you, the council, in my opinion, have great staff. I got to meet with them once this weekend. I've heard some other good things about the staff. I think for the council to really utilize the staff is you have to be able to let the staff tell it like it is, for good, bad, popular, not popular, give you the information that you need so you can give good calculated, you can make a good calculated decision. If what we put together out here doesn't jive with what you guys are thinking, then we need to go back and we need to reassess maybe what we are doing and maybe give you different information or more information. If we really feel that our information is right on, we've had studies, we've had surveys, then I think we need to talk to you about what it's doing. So let's say, Counselor, you have the issue with it, that you don't agree. Maybe you and I can meet and we can talk about stuff and we can say, this is what's really going on, so you have a better idea of what you're going to be voting on or what you're going to be discussing. We have study meetings. We can talk about those in the study meetings. We can go out for a tour, go drive it, go look at it, and see what really is out there. So we're all in this together. So we should not take it, if you don't like our answers, we should not take it personal. I do sometimes. That's just me. I take everything personal because it's my job. But I don't use it in that way. I'm very passionate about what I do. I'm very passionate about the agency I work for, and I want it to be successful. But if this decision-making board doesn't like something, I'm going to work very hard with the staff, and they will too, to make sure we come up with something that we can give you so that you guys can make that calculated good decision. So it's about communication, about information, and always be transparent. There's no reason to hide anything, or I'm telling you this and I'm telling you this. That does not happen. We go back to the question when I first answered, integrity, right? So we want to make sure that we're giving everything we can to you and that you can make that decision. And we just keep working at it until we come to a kind of a neutral point where you vote and we move it forward. Whatever that decision is, Even if it's not what we thought it was, we're going to support the decision because that's what we do. This is your company, and we're here to provide everything to you so you can run your company for the community and move it forward.
Deputy Mayor Moran.
Okay, I think we've pretty much answered 7, so I'm going to go to 8. What is your philosophy for developing and implementing a budget for the city?
Budget. Okay. Okay, we start the process. It's based obviously on revenues and expenditures. So for myself, I'm a very conservative type of person when it comes to budgeting. I have a finance director, and her and I work really close together, just like I would if I got the position here with our finance director. It's very important that we are able to provide the service to our community, the service that they expect. Having a consistent revenue source is the ultimate. We got to have that. I've been in very lean times where our revenue, where at the county I'm at now, dropped 55% in 1 year because the barrel of oil dropped. What do? So we had to really dig deep, and we've done flat-based budgeting for the last 3 years. Not zero-based budgeting, but flat-based budgeting. What you got this year, you get next year, and then we'll look at exceptions and additions based on revenue. So we budget our revenue conservatively, because if we get some at the end, it just builds our fund balance, unrestricted fund balance. Our unrestricted fund balance now is really good. So a philosophy of mine is our state requires, or they don't require because it's not written in statute, but it's a request, but it's almost a requirement that you have to keep 3/12 of your general fund in a rainy day fund. So for us, 51 million our general fund, 3/12 is about $10.5 million. So for me, I like to keep double what that is. I don't like to keep the minimum. I want to keep double because you never know what's going to happen. We have issues. Everybody has issues. So if something comes up, an emergency. We also keep a contingency in the board budget of anywhere from $250,000 to $500,000. And the contingency there is for the council or the board to say, oh, this happened. It's not budgeted, right, this project, but it is budgeted because you have contingency money. So we have money in there to do that. So we start from what we have and we move it over. So my line items or my columns basically are base budget, then our budget that we got when the department heads turned it in, then the department additions, county manager column, board column. And the board column is the final column. That's when we get it all done with our workshops. That's where it ends. So that's my philosophy. That's kind of how I do budget. We work on it on a flat base plus exceptions. And exceptions are just basically, I want this year that I didn't have last year. You gave me 2 cars last year, I want 4 cars this year. Those 2 cars are the exception. So we write those in, and then we're in the budget process right now. We're starting budget workshops next week. So with that being said, we have our department budget ready to go, and then I'm going to meet with the finance director. I like to be in it. I don't micromanage it, but I like to be in it because I like to know what the budget is, right? So, and then we're going to basically go over it with the board, and then we're going to start making our changes and move it forward. We do three meetings, and then we get it approved preliminarily, then we send it to the state for approval.
So how do you build strong relationships with other governmental agencies, both municipality-wise, but also higher levels of government?
We have to. I mean, flat out, we have to, because it's the relationships that help with everything we do. So for myself, I'm on the New Mexico County Insurance Authority as the vice chairman. I'm on the New Mexico County Workman's Comp pool. These are both pool boards, county pool boards, as the vice chairman. I'm also on litigation committee. I'm also on bylaws committees, and we deal with the state on that level and all the counties together. So our surrounding counties, we meet with the managers and the boards and also the councils and the city managers of those areas, because the county, right, and then the cities are all these things on my desk, but we're all in it together. We're all in it one big entity trying to move our whole location forward. Having those relationships is critical. My relationships with our legislators and our governor is invaluable because we know these people from visiting them, we know these people from going to see them, and we can ask for appropriation. So right now, we're asking for two financial appropriations to build some roads down in our county. We're getting some, I guess, some interest in it because of our relationships with these people. And if we didn't have the relationships, if we didn't care, and if it was just Sammamish and we put a big wall, we've been talking about walls in our U.S. for a while. If we put a big wall up, what is that going to do for us? It doesn't do anything for us. So tear down the wall and let's go out there and let's get together with everybody and see if we can make our whole area better. So to me, having those relationships with, I have 21 city councilors that I deal with on a weekly, bi-weekly basis because those are the cities that were in our community. I have 3 mayors, and so we deal with them as well. They either come to my office, I go to their office, but we talk about the same issues. Transportation issues is huge. Housing is huge for us. Development, we want other development to come into our area because what if the oil and gas goes away? Are we gonna just be out there in the ghost town? You're gonna hear the whistle in the background because it's dust blowing everywhere. You gotta have some kind of sustainability. So we're always looking to lobby other companies to come into our area so that when this big one goes away, we still have this coming up. And so that's what we've been doing with the cities especially, because all your amenities and a lot of your things are within the cities. So I was part of a groundbreaking for the new Albertsons. I was part of a groundbreaking for the new Oxy building to house another 200 people. Those were all in the city. We were invited to go with them, with the city and the mayor to do that. That's important to me. It makes me feel really good that we're collaborating together. We need to always do that. It's important. You know, with the council's permission, I want to meet with our legislators. I want to meet with all the other counties. I want to meet with all the other cities. I want to go and talk to people and say, this is what we're doing. This is what we're thinking about, but it's going to impact your community because when Sammamish ends, their community starts. So we're all tied in together.
Very good. Councilmember Ross.
Please give an example of organizational restructuring you initiated. What was the reason for the restructuring, and was it successful? Would you do anything differently if the situation presented itself again?
Okay. Anything different? Okay. I'll talk about the first one I had to do when I first became county manager in Eddy County. So when I got promoted to county manager, first month, the board asked me to fix the fire department. And I'm like, okay, what's wrong with the fire department? Because I didn't know because I wasn't involved with that portion of it. Well, I soon found out that our fire department is volunteer. We work with the career departments within our cities, and we have this type of relationship. It's a good relationship. They cover us, we cover them, and we jointly go to calls together. So, fix it. Well, what's wrong with it? Well, 60% of our volunteers are going to walk out next week if we don't do something with that doggone director that we have in there. I didn't really know the director that well, so my first job was to have them not leave. And it was a difficult situation because I have 11 chiefs, 240 plus volunteers, and everything that goes along with it. Okay, so I decided the first thing I need to do was talk to the department head, right? That's the leader of the organization. Previous manager and the department head had rubbed these people the wrong way. Happens. So talk to the department head. I got his side of the story. Then I was going to talk to one of the chiefs, and I ended up talking to all the chiefs, and it was one of those invite me to dinner type of meetings, but it wasn't dinner. So for 3.5 hours, I got an earful about it. So basically, rather than telling them, this is the way it is, he's our director, because obviously there was some major issues there. I asked them, what are their options? Because I like buy-in from people. What are your options for doing that? So we came out, in those 3.5 hours, we came up with 4 different options, 4 different organizational options. Split the departments, fire the manager. That was one of their options, obviously. Do that. replace the emergency management, because emergency management is pretty much at the top, and then you got fire, you got EMS, you got everything that goes underneath it. One of those ideas I came up with was swapping that, putting fire service on the top and putting emergency management as a subheading under the fire service department, which is not real popular because most of the time it's reversed. Bottom line, we took that, we reorganized the fire department, we split the emergency management over here, we put fire service over here, we put him underneath his own assistant to handle all the emergency business, and we put a fire service director in over here. The chiefs didn't walk out. We have one of the best fire departments in the area today, and everybody's working toward making it better. And the chiefs, they're always going to be asking for things and doing things, but they've never threatened me again to walk out. And one of the things I did to help that situation is I became a firefighter to support them. And I'm still one of those today, and I have the respect, and that's the main thing, is they respect me. They might not like everything budget-wise, but they respect me, and they respect what we did organizationally, and it has worked ever since.
Councilmember Ritchie?
So I've got 4 questions. I don't know if we're going to get around all 4 of them, but I'm just going to,
Okay.
this is just stuff I brought in. So
Okay?
I'll go ahead and deal with this because we were just talking about the fire rescue or, your experience down in New Mexico. So I guess my overarching question is, we have a different relationship here. We have King County Sheriff, we have Eastside Fire and Rescue that is a regional group. Members on this council sit on the board for, we like to call it EFR, Eastside Fire and Rescue, and Republic, our garbage collection, and I'm sure I'm missing a couple others. But we have contract relationships with these other entities, and they service other communities as well, obviously. So what's your experience working, these contracts come up, and we deal with issues, and, we had a snowstorm in Republic, didn't pick up the garbage, and we had, so we have a lot of these kind of mid-contract issues. What's been your experience working within a contract, renewing a contract? How does that work based upon your experience, and where have you had some positives and negative experiences with those?
Okay. In my whole career, I've dealt with contracts, because whenever you do a project, you have a contract. So, or you do a service, if you're outsourcing it, you have a contract. So the main place that we did most of the contracts was in City of Dana Point, Beach City. We contracted pretty much everything. All public safety was contract. The maintenance and all the projects were contract. Trash pickup was contract. Striping was contract. Beach cleanup was contract, because Dana Point's a beach city. All contract. So we had a lot of paperwork to do with these things. So when we write them, obviously we write them how we need them. We have boilerplate, that we can write it in severability and terms and all the other stuff, money. So you write all the contracts, but we always put a stipulation in there about termination. And termination can be anywhere from, $1,000 a day to $10,000 a day, depending on what you're going to do. So it's important that the contractor understands the contract. Sometimes the contractors don't even know their own contract. So they do what they think is best, but it doesn't go along with the contract. We deal with it in projects all the time. When we outsource big transportation projects, or we're going to overlay 7 miles of street, or we're going to, reconstruct millions of dollars, and then you start getting change ordered to death, which I don't like change orders, and understandably, you're going to get a couple, but when they're nickel and diming you for everything, that's not good, and I don't think the contract was written good enough. So we have to really look at what the contract says, and does it tie in and cover everything? And then you have to basically write herd on the contractor. And if you don't, then they might start out strong, but in my experience, they kind of get more lax, especially if it's an ongoing contract year to year, or if you're going to go out for RFP, depending on something, you get a new contractor, then it starts over again, and that type of thing. So I like to make sure the contracts are being followed with what the contract says. And if it's not, we need to have a meeting and ask why it's not being followed, or why you didn't do this, or what happened here. Obviously, trash pickup, they probably couldn't get in with the snow, I would imagine. What are you going to do now to rectify that? How are you going to fix that for people? As far as contracting for police and sheriff and fire, we've done that as well, especially in Dana Point. I mean, we never really had an issue with that, because there was always some pride being in the city about, we want to do the best job we can. If there's now a contract, we want more apparatus, we want this, we want more equipment, we want whatever, then obviously we have to really scrutinize that and see if we have to budget for it. Fire and police, expensive. They're very expensive. And that's for a good reason, because they have so many things that are associated and attached with it that we have to really look at what's going on. I have no problem doing contracts. Like I said, I've done plenty of them. It's nice to have that we do contract some stuff, but we do have employees on the others, so we're kind of a balanced agency. But yeah, I think that's kind of the wave of the future. When I was in another agency, the particular mayor wanted to outsource everything. We outsourced snow plowing that one year, and 2 landscape contractors were doing the snow plowing for our residential roads. They ran out of money halfway through the winter season, and we got in trouble because we didn't tell the mayor that it was going to cost him more. We told the mayor it was going to cost him more. So we fixed it. We got our crews back working on snow plowing, and it saved the extra expense because we had big dump trucks with big blades on the front. We know what we're doing. And when you outsource it to the landscaping contractors, they just don't have the equipment. So that was an issue for us, but we resolved it and took care of it. But also that was a contract. Their contract was written a certain way, but they couldn't provide the equipment to do the job properly. So we got rid of the contracts. We went back to force account, and there you go.
I want to drill down a little bit more on the communication you talked about, and specifically social media. With our system as a weak mayor system, so to speak, and a city manager running the city, what would you see the role of the city manager in advising the council, the elected officials? And if you think that it would be a role for the city manager, some way, somehow, what would be the advice?
Be very careful what you say on social media, okay? Make sure it's factual. Make sure it has backup to it. Make sure you have the proper information to go along with it. The problem that I see with even appointed or even elected officials, sometimes they do their laundry out on Facebook and Twitter and a lot of these media outlets with it's not a bad intention. It's good intention. It's just being part of the community and doing it. The problem becomes when somebody can take an excerpt and say, you said this, counselor. Well, that's not what I meant. Look at your Facebook post. This is what you said. And you say, it's not what I meant. So those issues can come up. So myself, I have a once a year meeting with my elected officials. And we talk about social media. We have a social media policy. Because sometimes we have our employees that have, what's the best way to say it, have said things on social media derogatory to the agency. We didn't have a social media policy before I got there. Can't do anything about it. So people are just kind of saying whatever they want. That's not good for the agency. We have to be transparent, but we don't have to dig into the weeds and do something that's counterproductive to what we believe, or what we think, or what we do. Information, the community needs to know. I'm a community member. I want to know certain things about the agencies. I want to know what's happening to my agency next door. So I want to know these things. The agency should really focus on social media policy and getting proactive when it comes to the media rather than reactive. Now, I particularly have 1 or 2 people that like to really be activists in my community, and I try very hard to go to them to give them information. I don't shy away from it. I don't shy away from the newspaper. Because it's better to be proactive and give the information than it is to be reactive and try to fix the information that came out that was possibly wrong. So being on social media, having advice is really be careful what you put on social media. Make sure it's factual, make sure it has information, make sure you can back it up, and make sure it's the same statement you made there, you make to somebody else, so there's not any conflict. I mean, that's the advice I would give right off the front, or right out the gate, if you will. And we need to make sure that that happens. This is our community. This is our community. Listen to me. This is your community, right? So we need to make sure that the community itself is well-informed, and the big word, we can put it on the screen for everybody, is trust. And we have to make sure we have trust. We have trust with the council, trust with the staff, trust with the community, and trust with all stakeholders within our area. And that's all wrapped up. We don't have a newspaper, or you don't have a newspaper in Sammamish. We need to work on that. We need to get the information out. And we need to get good, proper, wonderful, transparent communication out. And that's all part of the social media.
Councilmember Valderrama?
Yes, thank you again. Most, if not all of you had cited concerns of not having a unified vision and goals for the city. After talking to staff and council members, how would you manage the council and staff to achieve this?
A unified vision. I think we kind of touched on that a little bit earlier. Unification is exactly what it says. It takes people and puts them together for a common goal. It's like the military. So you have your soldiers, and what are they doing? They have a common goal to either storm that hill, take that beach, do whatever they need to do. If some of them are over here, we're going to go take the trees, and we're going to go on the boat, and we're going to just sit here and make sure the enemy doesn't come here, that's not unified, and you're probably going to lose. So the unification, you go as a group, you're going to have some casualties, but you're going to win and you're going to do it. The casualties for us are not necessarily people. The casualties for us is the other vision items that have to stay to the side. So you have 7 goals now that were put before this council. Maybe we look at them, and there's one particular one, I think that it has more of a broader sense that we could take, and we could take a couple of these other ones and pop into that one that is a little bit broader. We talked about livability. We talked about transportation plan. Well, you could lump a little bit of that in there, and basically that would unify that one particular idea or one goal moving forward. So your staff and whoever this new manager will be works for you. So you need to be able to disseminate the vision to them or to us to make sure we can give you the proper information to see your vision through. And to unify it, it's communication, it's information, it's trust, delegation, and allowing people to be successful in their own skin. If somebody comes up with a good idea, they need the credit and they need to present that idea. And maybe that'll help with all our vision, because of this one item that came up might even change the vision. Right? We have an oil and gas liaison. That came up because we were talking about what's the best way to get the industry and the community together and solve these issues. Okay? The vision was get the oil industry to be more of a partner with us. Good vision. How do we do that? Well, we can do this, we can ask them to pay for this, we can ask them to do this, we can ask them to lobby for this, or we can narrow the vision and be more unified and get one central point, and it all focuses here, and it all focuses here to that one person, and with that being done, it's efficient, it saves money, and it gets the job done.
Thank you.
Minutes left here. So we have 2 questions that I think are important for council. First,
Okay.
so I'm going to ask them both together just so that we can get them in that 5 minutes. First,
Sure.
is there anything else you want to tell us before we conclude? And then the other is, if you're selected for the position, when are you able to start?
Okay. Well, I think we've talked a lot about it this whole weekend, and I've been very, very blessed and very grateful for this whole weekend from the council, staff, and the community. It's been a wonderful experience for me. I really had a great time, and I'm very excited about the opportunity to come here and be your next city manager. I want to be your next city manager. I have a contract. It is with my board, and it has a 30-day notice in it. And if I know my board, they're going to want the 30 days. So to wind everything down. So with that being said, I'm going to try, if I was selected, I will try to get housing done. We own a home, we have to put up for sale, you know, all the minutia that goes along with it. I could start early May, because this is March, end of the month, 30 days is April, a couple of days probably to move, so probably sometime in May would be great. Is that acceptable to the council? Okay. Exactly.
We only have 3
Not a whole I
minutes.
could do about it.
So we only have 3 minutes left. So if there's anything else that any other council member would like to ask, now would be a good time to press your button. Councilmember Valderrama.
Yeah. What do you see as the greatest challenge in working with the city?
The greatest challenge.
We only got 3 minutes.
No, 2 minutes and 50 seconds.
Yeah, I could say that there's a couple of them, but probably for me is to everything that's happened in the past, try to learn from what's happened, push the reset button, and start forward fresh and clean. There's going to be a lot of things that I'm going to learn that happened before. I'm going to have a lot of people tell me their stories. I'm going to have a lot of people try to convince me about their stories. And so with that being said, I need to learn about it, and I will. And then once I learn about it, I want to start fresh and clean, and let's move forward in a new, fresh way and see Sammamish be extremely successful, more than it already is.
Thank you.
You didn't go long enough. Now we can ask another question.
I'm trying.
Work with us.
You can leave early if there's no other questions.
I
I
like
just want to
answering the
afford
questions.
council the opportunity if they have anything.
Do you guys have anything else for me?
Have you enjoyed
I
the sun
promise I'll
this
do the
weekend?
148.
Did you enjoy the sun this weekend? Because it's really not here all the time.
No, I've been telling all the candidates it's like this all the
This is the
time.
way it is all the time. Well, you know, with our research and stuff, we understand the weather. But interestingly enough, my wife told me one time that she likes the moisture because it's good for her face. Right? And so where we're at is extremely dusty.
Yeah.
So we welcome the water because everything we have is dirty. There's dust constantly. There's dust in the door handles of the cars. There's dust everywhere. So we're very excited to come to a place that has moisture and not a whole lot of dust and beautiful trees because it cleans the air. We don't have a whole lot of trees where we're at down there. And it's, like I said, it's been Sammamish has been well thought out. And so that's why we're here. And that's why I'm sitting in front of you today. And I have 56, 55, 55.
Don't feel obligated to count it down.
Yeah, so we're very excited. My wife and my daughter, they've been texting me all weekend. How's it going? How's it going? I said, it's going good. I'm enjoying myself, having a great time. So they're very excited. And I don't know if I can smile any bigger, but 36 seconds.
It's okay. I can feel the airwaves too here. Yes, thank you. I know that we all really appreciate your time and energy that you've put into this process. So thank you very much.
Thank you guys very much. It's been a real pleasure, and I thoroughly enjoyed my time here, and it was really, really fun, and I thank you very much.
Very good.
Thank you.
You have 16 seconds. Run so you can go enjoy the sun.
Yes, enjoy the sun.
All right, I'm going to attempt to keep us on time here. So we have our next candidate, Greg Young, and you can come front and center here.
Front and center.
Good evening. Thank you for another evening with council here. We have a series of questions that we'll take turns asking you up here. So with that, let me begin. I think we've introduced ourselves. I'm assuming that the audience knows us, and since we all spoke with Mr. Young yesterday, he knows us as well. So I'll just launch right in. So we've got a timer over here. We're going to try and keep ourselves on time here. Please provide council with a brief review of your background and experience and why you are the best candidate for this job. I think so, yes.
Not on.
It's not on. I
Oh,
don't think. Green for him.
There you go.
There we go. Is it? Nope. There we go.
There
go
we
ahead.
go. Thank you. Good evening. Thank you for having me here tonight. I look forward to talking about my qualifications and answering your questions. As far as brief background of my background, started my public service career with the state auditor's office. Spent 5 years going from city to city and county to county and looking at local governments, trying to see how they did the same thing in different ways. It was quite interesting because no two cities have the same issues and none of them are really organized the same way. So I was able to see a multitude of ways of solving similar, if not identical, problems. As is the case many times in the auditor's office, you get to be known by some of your auditees, and it's quite common for auditors to be hired away by units of local government, and that indeed was happened to me. I was hired by the City of Ocean Shores as both their finance director and their planning director. Ocean Shores was a master planned community in the 1960s that actually financially failed, and the city rose for the ashes. And so the city, while it was a master planned community, the Growth Management Act had just been instituted. And so my job was to take the first steps in putting the Growth Management Act and putting the city under compliance. And since then, I've spent nearly 30 years doing exactly that. As the Growth Management Act has evolved and nuances have come about, I've kind of been there on the front lines and worked with various cities to be sure that not only they were in compliance, but what we did made sense. After leaving the City of Ocean Shores, I joined the Aberdeen School District, and for a couple of years there, I actually worked on renovating their school buildings. We redid one of our elementary schools every year. I was in charge of all the non-teachers, so I had about 600 employees under my responsibility, and the superintendent was in charge of all the teachers. After leaving the Aberdeen School District, I became the town of Lacona's very first town administrator. They had grown to the point, and the laws of the Washington state and personnel issues had become complex enough that they felt that they needed professional management. So I started there and was their administrator. I actually did their capital improvement plans. They really did not have any to speak of. So that included their streets and all of their utilities, worked on personnel, and revamped their budgeting process. After leaving Lacona, I moved to the city of Marysville, where I became their economic development director and also wrote all their grants. The city of Marysville had just experienced the Tulalip tribes unveiling their plans for Quilceda Village, replete with what on paper looked like a very aggressive economic development kind of center with, of course, the hotel, the casino, the outlet center. And while not all of that had been built yet, but of course almost all of it has now been built, Marysville wanted to be positioned, and they had some trepidation about whether they could compete with what was going to be a very large and very powerful economic engine across the freeway. As it turned out, after doing a lot of research, I was able to write and then institute their first economic development plan. And today, Marysville has a very balanced economy. It is located, as if you probably know, just north of Everett. And so it was a bedroom community predominantly. And one of the things that we needed to do, and one of the things I was able to do, was to start balancing their economy, especially in the area of commercial retail. After Marysville, I moved on to the city of Ferndale, where I've been for the last 15 years. Marysville, again, was a bedroom community just north of Bellingham. And they, again, desired to balance their economy to grow in a logical way. Ferndale is a historically agriculturally based community, and they were seeing rapid growth, predominantly because the cost of land was cheaper in Ferndale than it was in Bellingham. And so they were concerned about how the city would evolve from predominantly a small bedroom community into what it is today. And I'm very proud of the fact that we were able to chart a future and institute that future where we were able to keep the small town character of Ferndale, but also build on that character. One of the things we've seen is that we actually issued more single-family permits for 5 years running than the city of Bellingham. It's a community of 90,000 people. And we did it logically, we did it progressively. We instituted our parks and trails plan. We were able to get out ahead of development and place trails and trail easements where they could be eventually linked up. And we eventually brought in some not only living wage jobs, but a significant amount of retail commercial. So that's kind of my history of my service in the state of Washington. Why I'm the best person for this job? I think I have the unique blend of experience and temperament, an in-depth knowledge of Washington State's laws. Washington State has some extremely onerous laws. As you probably have known and experienced, their Open Public Meetings Act is one of the most stringent in the country. Their economic development toolbox is probably one of the smallest of any state in the union. So you have to be strategic, you have to be surgical, and you have to know where you want to go. And that's one thing I'm very, very good at, is helping a community define what they are now, what they want to retain, what they want to change, and then to balance those interests as the city continues to grow. I think I can bring a proper temperament, a sense of humor, a knowledge, and a skill base that will help you move into the future.
Very good. I'm going to start down at that end of the dais, if that's okay. So Councilmember Valderrama.
All right, thank you for being part of this process. And I'm going to follow on what you were talking about, because most, if not all, of you had talked about your concerns on economic development. And having seen and met with our staff and council members, I wanted in seeing some of our different goals. How would you go about managing the accomplishment of a balanced economic development in our city?
There is really no solution that can be picked up and dropped on a community from afar. Economic development needs to reflect the values and the mores of a community. And what's hard is that many times people say, well, why do things have to change? It was great when I was a kid. I played in that field across the way. I fished in that pond where there's now a housing development. Why do things have to change? Why can't we just keep it the way it was? It was just right. Well, I remember my childhood. I was born in Southern California, and where I played are now subdivisions. So I know how it is I went home, and after I got out of college, I went back to that small town, and I couldn't find my house. I actually had to turn around a couple times to find the house that I grew up in because it had changed so much. And change is something that is inevitable, it's unstoppable, but you do have the ability to shape it. You do have the ability to control it to the extent that you can define what you want and what you don't want. And you need to have an understanding that every choice you make is going to have consequences. The consequences may not play out exactly as you envision, so you need to be flexible enough to be able to react and kind of correct your course as time goes on. So I think economic development in Sammamish is going to continue. You will never be an employment center. You're never going to have manufacturing, industrial, aerospace jobs. You're never going to have big box stores, and that's probably a good thing, because I don't think that's what this community wants or needs. And I certainly don't think those are the kind of conversations we need to have. What the conversations we need to have is, what do you want to be when more people choose, as all of you have, to make Sammamish your home? Because it's a wonderful place to be.
Thank you.
Councilmember Hornish.
All right, Greg, I know in your experience, I'm sure you've been involved with controversial issues. So what I'm looking for are two examples, and one where it was a good result and one where it's not so good, like a bad result. And I'm trying to figure out if you can tell us what you learned from both of those and what you would use to apply here in Sammamish.
Yeah, I think the two examples will probably come from the city of Ferndale, only because, having been there for 15 years, there's been a lot more instances of where there are situations that turned out the way we had hoped and situations that perhaps didn't turn out the way we had hoped. In Ferndale, they tussled with the idea, it's a city that straddles Interstate 5, and growth was coming, and we needed to figure out how that growth, the shape it should take. And so we had a big box debate, because actually Walmart was interested in coming to town. And the interesting thing about that debate was you could remove big box and you can institute town center. You can institute almost anything. It was a debate over the shape and the form that growth was going to take in the community. And we engaged in our community. We went through almost a 3-year process talking about the advantages and disadvantages of different strategies, how we could embrace that change and still make it our own. And we actually came up with a program that required, it was a point-based system whereby any large retailer that came into town would have to have engage in the community through the funding of festivals, but more importantly have leading edge technology and other things like that. So we use that also in our, we've developed our residential design guidelines, again, to follow the idea of LEED certification, but for homes. It doesn't really exist yet, but we worked with our building officials and came up with how we could integrate low-impact development standards, especially because storm drainage is such a huge issue right now. So that was one example of where it was a tough conversation because, again, some people were, I think, rightfully afraid of change because change can be scary because of many times people feel that they don't have the ability to shape it, that is going to be foisted upon them, that they're going to have to react to it, when in fact, change is something that maybe it's easier when we were kids, the idea of change was exciting. The idea of not knowing the future, of leaving your home and going to college or moving to a new community was exciting. But so I now have children and grandchildren, and I've spoke to some of your children, and I've encouraged them to go for the adventure, to take the chance. And I reflected on that coming here tonight because this is going to be a change for me. But it's something that I want to embrace. So I think embracing change and doing it in a positive way and engaging your community and looking with eyes wide open at the future is the way to go. So those are tough conversations, and I think I was able to handle them well. One situation that, in hindsight, did not turn out the way we had hoped was actually a situation where we made the right decisions, but reality turned out to be different than what we had believed. It actually has to do with our water system. We had traditionally gotten our water out of the Nooksack River that flows through the city. And mostly because of the salmon issues, we went back to some wells that we had. And the wells turned out, hired engineers, and boy, engineers are wonderful people. They're dedicated, they're educated, but sometimes even their best guesses are just guesses. They're educated guesses, but they're guesses. And it turned out that our water, even though we had done the studies, and turned out to be significantly harder than what we had thought. People's clothes were turning orange, their water tanks. So we had to actually invest in a reverse osmosis system to clean up our water. So it's something that in hindsight, I wish we would have. I've tussled with this one because it really caused a lot of turmoil in the city, but yet we did everything we were supposed to do. And I think the lesson I learned from that is that even though you lay awake at night, I know I do, and worry about how to manage the city, how to have all of you work together and define a vision for the future and come up with a strategy, and some work and some don't. I guess I've had to come to the realization that sometimes, as the old saying goes, the best laid plans of mice and men. And this was a situation where we just had to pick ourselves up, dust ourselves off, and say, okay, we made the right decisions given the information we had. It didn't work out the way we wanted. Let's fix it. And that's where we focused our attentions, and we actually did turn the situation around.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Thank you. Good to see you, Greg.
Good to see you.
Thanks for spending time with us yesterday and today. I appreciate it.
As
You
I
having fun
told
yet?
most of you, I enjoy this. This is actually exciting.
Right on. Cool. So, question about how you interact with the council and how you see your role working with what at times can be a deeply divided and sometimes dysfunctional council. What do you view as your experience in dealing with that, and what are the kinds of things you found success in doing, and how do you view that going forward with us?
Sure, absolutely. Things aren't as bad as you think they are. They really aren't. I have worked for hundreds of citizens who've been elected to councils. I've never had a council that didn't have issues. You can't put 7 people together and expect them to have kumbaya moments and hug each other every night. It just doesn't happen. It doesn't happen in families. It doesn't happen on councils. It doesn't happen in communities. Your problems here are unique because they are your problems, but they're not insurmountable. Not by any stretch of the imagination. I think there's a way to work together. I have a lot of strategies that I've used, and I'll find out which ones work well, which ones kind of work, and which ones won't work, and I'll course correct and try something else, because just like I mentioned when I was with the auditor's office and I've seen how cities can do the same thing multiple ways, I know how to solve problems in multiple different ways. So I think working with the council in an open, honest, and frank manner, you all have opinions. You all, I think I've told every one of you, you guys had the guts to run for office. In 2019, that's not an easy thing to do. You're exposing yourself and your families and your friends and your reputations to scrutiny. And I appreciate that. I don't think I could run for public office, and I've thought about it. I don't think I could do it, which is ironic because here I am, wanting to lead a city, but I don't know if I could. Election night, the idea of sitting there and wondering if what you've said and if people will agree with you, and enough people will agree with you, I don't know if I could do that, and I laud you for doing that. You guys want to serve your communities, and I want to serve you well. And so I think I have the skill set, again, and the temperament, and it takes a fair amount of humor because even though this is a serious job, we should not take it as serious as some people perhaps would like us to. You're supposed to enjoy yourself. If you don't like being a city council member, you're probably not going to run for re-election. We're probably not going to have some continuity, and you're probably not going to get out of the job what you had wanted to get out of the job. It's supposed to be fun. I know that sounds strange, but it can be. It will be at times. We've got hard work to do, but we'll get it done.
Thank you.
Councilmember Ross.
Tell us about your core values and how those values determine how you manage our city.
My core values are centered almost entirely on ethics and public service. I grew up in a military family, and duty and honor was something that was ingrained in me at a very young age. I grew up on and around military bases, and I've seen what dedication to country can mean and should mean. At the core of who I am open, I am honest, and I am ethical. I will tell everyone on this dais the same thing. I do not manage through the control of information. I've seen people who do that, and I don't know how they can do it because it's insidious. It may be productive in the short run, but it doesn't engender the kind of community spirit and honesty and respect that we need. We need to respect each other. We need to be professionally congenial. We will have disagreements, and we will figure out a way to work through them because there's so many issues facing the city. We need to figure out how to work together to solve them.
So what is your philosophy for developing and implementing a budget for a city?
As I was preparing for this job, I downloaded your budget, and I was sitting at our kitchen table going through it and making notes and taking yellow pads and circling things like that. And my wife came up and she says, "You've got a smile on the face. It looks like you're really enjoying yourself." And I did. Numbers are something that I think people either enjoy or they don't. And I enjoy them. The idea of building a budget is something that really gets me going. Your budget is well done, it's concise, it's easy to understand, and I think in a lot of ways, you can tell a lot about a city by reading the budget. I approach a budget in a manner probably similar, but maybe a little differently than a lot of people. I think budgets need to be goal-orientated. one of the things I do every year and around budget time, and sometimes we do it early in the year when there's one or more new council members, is I have a retreat where we go through a goal-setting process where everyone has the ability to throw their wild and crazy and their dreams and their wishes on a board, and we talk about them, and we work through them, and we figure out which ones, and I may have mentioned to many of you, I come up with 3 lists, the must-do list, the should-do list, and the could-do list. All important things, but some things are more important. Some things will need to be prioritized over others. And those lists then formulate the budget process. Because if you have a budget that doesn't carry out the wishes and desires of the council, then you're not doing your job. So I approach budgets from the standpoint that it needs to be, in a numerical fashion, a reflection of the values and the goals of the city, and it needs to show how you're incrementally working your way in a biennial budget toward those goals. You'll make corrections along the way, but I want to be able to lay down maybe 10 years worth of budgets, and you can see how the projects that you wanted to get done work their way through. So I think budgets are necessary. They don't need to be opaque. They don't need to be confusing. People need to understand them, and it's my job to have a budget that, again, reflects your wishes, desires, and dreams.
Very good. Deputy Mayor Moran.
Good afternoon.
Afternoon.
And my voice isn't a ton better than yesterday.
Oh, good. Mine was starting to go this morning. I'm thinking I'm going to come in here and just go.
We'll be the same. Okay. What would you do to build strong relationships with our surrounding cities and other governmental levels which are in jurisdictions? Sorry.
Talk to them. You need to talk to them. It's so easy to either sit on the plateau or sit in a valley or sit up somewhere and think your problems are unique and to just kind of live within your own mind. But things aren't done individually, and all of you know this as well as I do. Your transportation issues will not be solved unless we engage with Redmond and we engage with Issaquah, we engage with the Department of Transportation, we engage with the state, and we engage with our citizens. We need to have solutions that are multifaceted. And one of the things I do, and I understand there already is a managers group that gets together in Whatcom County, helped form what was called the Small Cities Caucus. And that was every city in the county except for Bellingham, because they obviously are not small. And so once a month, all the administrators, managers, and mayors, along with the couple of port directors, the county executive, the chamber director, a representative from Puget Sound Energy, and a few others. We would get together once a month and talk about our issues. And more than anything else, it was the most enjoyable. I look forward to that meeting more than any other meeting that I ever went to, and I could tell that the others did too, because we got to know each other. We actually saw each other, and there's nothing like a bunch of professional folks commiserating together, because as the old saying goes, they've shared the same blood and the same mud. They know the issues. They know that they all have activists in their community that someday could be on the council, and they have issues that they need to solve together. The port up in Whatcom County came out with a program where each year they give out, it's about $80,000. It's fluctuated, for economic development. And we, the small cities, kind of came to a gentleman's agreement that each one of us would get about $20,000 a year. However, if one city had a project that needed more, we took less, because we knew that next year that pot would be there and our turn would come around. So I think working together, talking, and realizing that many of the solutions facing us are not going to be solved individually. They're only going to be solved if we work together with our partners at the local level, the state level, and the federal level.
Councilmember Stewart.
Thank you. Could you give us an example of an organizational restructuring you initiated? What was the reason for that restructuring, and was it successful? And would you do anything differently if that type of situation presented itself again?
Yeah, a good example of, I guess, to get to the, excuse me, the end of the question, I wouldn't change a thing because it worked. We have, and this is, you'll find this at every, I honestly say you'll probably find this at every city. You have planning and you have public works. So someone comes in and wants to, then I'll simplify it, build their home. So they talk to planning and figure out if the zoning is appropriate, what the setback is, how tall the building can be, those type of issues. And they get excited because planners are exciting people. They like the pretty pictures, and they draw things, and they say this will really help, and we're so happy to have you in the community. Your kids are going to go to school with my kids, and everything goes well. Then it shifts across the hall, and it was literally across the hall, to the Public Works Department, where the engineers have to figure out about the water, sewer, storm. The building inspectors have to get involved. The plans examiner have to tell them why they can't build the home and comply with the energy code or the plumbing code or the mechanical code the way they want to. And that takes a long, long time. And so people were jazzed on the planning side and disheartened on the public works infrastructure side of it. I tell people that if the planners get it wrong, your house is built too close to the property line. If the public works folks get it wrong, your sewer doesn't drain. Your plumbing and your electricity and your house doesn't function the way it's supposed to. So it's important. And the roads, when it comes to commercial development, the roads, we inherit the roads that developers build. And so it's incumbent upon us to be sure that they comply with our development standards, and we have our inspectors out there to be sure the compaction is appropriate, because even though a newly paved road looks great, what's it going to look like in 5, 10, 20 years when the developer, either of the subdivision or the developer of the mall or what have you, is gone? And now there's sinkholes, you have alligatoring, you have to go in and dig everything out and redo it. It's best. So there was this disconnect. The planners couldn't understand why Public Works took so long. And Public Works couldn't figure out why the planners couldn't understand why their job was so hard. So we actually came up with a community development model where they now work together. We actually have them sit in the same room at the inception. And the planners have actually spent time, a considerable amount of time, with our engineers. Their eyes started opening wide. They never realized the complexity of, say, a long plat, where you try to figure out, where the fire hydrants need to be in a logical way. Why you need a paved access road to a storm pond, because your Vector truck has to get to it and a gravel road's not going to support it. So that was a success because I got my employees to appreciate the complexity of each other's jobs. And now when developers come in, we have a team approach. They just don't work don't work in silos. We actually bring them in we do pre-applications as a team, and we lead them through the process as a team. So that was something that was very difficult because it had been traditionally one side of the hallway against or not necessarily working with the other side of the hallway.
Okay, we'll head back down to your end of the dais. Councilmember Valderrama.
Thank you. Thanks, Greg. Most, if not all of you had also cited concerns of the need for a unified vision of the city and its goals. After talking to the staff and the council, how would you manage this council and staff to achieve this?
One of the things that I believe I asked every one of you is, do you think these 7 individuals can work together for the betterment of the community? And every single one of you said yes. And I believe it's true. I believe that I can have you coalesce around the need to bring the city forward. We're not always going to agree. And that's the thing about visions. There is no one correct vision for Sammamish. There is a vision that all of you will come up with. And then there's a vision that your successors will come up with. Visions change. They need to change because communities change. when 1999, when the city was founded, I believe it was 1999, the vision of the city probably wasn't what the vision would be or should be today, because your city is not what it was in 1999. And in 10 and 20 and 30 years, it's going to need to evolve. So I think I have the ability to use techniques and tools to urge you, to cajole you, to figure out a way for us to engage with our community, because it's just not your 7 voices. It's the voices of your community. You've been elected to represent them. And you represent, as you know, you represent everyone in the city. You don't have, wards where you have to just, represent one group of people living on certain streets in certain areas. By the way, I agree, your road system is terrible. I got lost today so many times driving around. Just as an aside. But I spent a lot of time today driving through your neighborhoods. Yesterday, I spent time in the parks. Today, I spent hours driving through the neighborhoods. Not only was it just like yesterday, I saw everyone happily down at the lake and enjoying the parks. Today, I saw people walking and jogging and walking their dog and sitting on benches and engaging with one another. It was quite compelling to see the sense of community people have, the pride they have when they walk around. So I think I have the ability to have you, and I have the tools to enable you to articulate what many of your constituents, the ones that we ask and the ones that tell us. Years ago, I heard something that the number one reason why people don't volunteer is because they're not asked. And you'll probably be able to appreciate this. You have the same 5, 10, 20 people that work over and over, and then they get burned out. Well, just at the meet and greet, there was a young couple, won't mention their name right now, but they called City Hall when they moved here and wanted to volunteer, and they never got a call back. I told them that I'm going to call them on the first day I'm here. I took down their number, because when someone actually picks up the phone, takes time out of their busy life and wants to engage in your community, the last thing you want to do is say, "Nah, we're good. No, thanks." So I think I have the ability to kind of crack the nut of engaging the community and at helping you figure out what the vision for the city should be.
All right. My question is on communication and specifically social media. So I'm curious what your views are as a city manager in a weak mayor system as of ours. What you think the role of the city manager should be and would be if you were hired. And if you think it is to advise the council members, what would your advice be to us as the elected officials on use of social media?
Social media is something that I came to understand as it evolved. It's our kids today. I've seen pictures of toddlers looking at magazines trying to swipe the paper pages. Some of you may have had that with your own children. We grew up in a different time, but we grew up and got engaged in social media at its inception. And so I've been able to see how social media has evolved and how community has started engaging in social media, both for good and for bad. I think the role for the city manager and the role for staff is very similar. It's our job on social media, and some of you may have gotten this from some of the materials, the difference that we use in Ferndale for social media is that we don't push out information. It's a two-way conversation. We have empowered a number of our employees to monitor social media day and night, and they literally do it, and to correct the record when necessary, to stop rumors when necessary. They do it so the council doesn't have to. And one of the hardest things that I've had to get my arms around is encouraging the council to not engage. Don't take the bait. You know, all you're going to do is give validity where validity shouldn't be there. It's hard not to want to react, but sit for a while. You know, maybe sleep on it. I've asked my council during meetings, and they've gotten very good at it. They all take their phone and they set it next to their nameplate for the entirety of the council meeting. I do not want to see any of them playing, communicating, because they're not listening, they're not engaging. You all need to listen to each other, to staff. We're in this room for a purpose, for a dedicated, focused purpose. And social media and engaging in social media during a council meeting is something that my mom used to give me a look, and I think everyone's mom used to give them a look. And she used to twist my ear, and no one would see it, but God, it would hurt. But she would give me a look, and whatever I was doing, I stopped. I just knew the look. And so I may give you all the look here and now when maybe we're not being as professional and cordial as we should be. And believe me, if you're engaged on your phone, it is not something that's going to go over well. I know it's hard to say, it's probably hard to hear, but there's a role for social media during the council meetings, not it. 10 o'clock, 11 o'clock, midnight is probably not the time for it either. We all have opinions, but let staff do their job. We have communication professionals who know what to say, know how to say it, know when to say it. If you have issues, talk to me, talk to them. We will figure out how to communicate. Many times it's not what you say, it's how you say it. I've told my kids that their whole life, and I've turned around and now I've used it in my whole life. So communications is essential, but it needs to be focused, it needs to be targeted, it needs to be strategic. There needs to be a reason for communications, just not the fact that, you know, I'm upset.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Thank you. Greg, you've had a chance to wander around the neighborhoods, the parks, the city now for a couple days, and I'm curious as to, in no particular order, what are the top three, I'm going to use the word goals, but good and bad things you see that are going well and that need to be addressed in the next 6 months to 2 years? And that to me is a pretty short-term range. So what are the things you see are, we need to pick this up more, we need to, this is working, let's duplicate that there? Yeah. That kind of broad question, what do you see in there?
Sure. I probably have said this before, so if I repeat myself, I'm sorry, but I look at things with a very practiced eye. I've said before that I have the world's most boring home videos for vacations because my vacations are sewer grates and decorative lamp posts and logos on the side of city vehicles. I can't walk around a city without looking at the infrastructure. And so today when I was driving around, it became visually very apparent to me that all of these subdivisions have these monument signs out front, most of them very, very beautiful. And I've come to the conclusion, and you can tell me if I'm right, that people identify with the name that's on that piece, on that rock, or on that piece of wood, where there might be a fountain or there might be flowers. When they say they live in Sammamish, they say, I live there, or I live here. I have a feeling, and what I took away today, is that the way to engage the community is to actually take those subdivisions as unique organisms and engage with them individually, and perhaps even a little differently depending on whether it's an older subdivision, a newer subdivision. But today I realize that that's how I would approach it. I would approach it not from a standpoint of what do the citizens of Sammamish want, but what are the needs and wants of this neighborhood, and that neighborhood, because I have to believe that the amenities are different, the mix of the people are different, what they expect from their government is different, and so I think we need to tailor our approach to respect and honor the differences as more than the similarities in this community. That is something that, as I was just driving around and realizing that I hit yet another dead end and had to turn around and backtrack once again, that I've come to realize that, okay, this is how the city has self-organized itself, organically, if you will, and that's the way we need to approach it. So I think that would be probably the top of my list initially, is to start figuring out with staff and with you the differences and the similarities, but most importantly the differences and what's unique about the different neighborhood, the different subdivisions you have in the city, and figure out how to maybe tackle Sammamish's identity by looking at its pieces, and I think that's a logical way to do it.
It's very insightful. Thank you. Appreciate it.
Councilmember Ross.
Okay, I'm going to ask a question. We do have an incredible Main Street here in Sammamish, by the way, if you drove that. Tell me, Greg, what's the role, in your view, and you've touched a little bit on this, what's the role of council and staff? How do you help each stay in their swim lane without negatively impacting morale and trust?
It's earned. It takes time. It's easier for staff because sometimes, many times, staff is intimidated by the council. You know, they're your boss's boss. And so it's many times, it's much easier for staff to stay in their lane, so to speak. Because they're professionals. They understand. They went to school for planning, or they went to work for maintenance, or they went to work for some aspect of local government that they are experts in. They know what they're doing. They like what they're doing, and they're good at it. So that is easier for me because I think it's almost organic, but it's something that also engender is that I need staff to come to me. I'm that fulcrum between council and between staff. It's my job to get direction from you and then engage staff to carry out that vision. And so staff, I think, is going to be in some ways easier, even though numerically there's more of them. On the council side, I think, again, it's going to take time. It's going to take trust. You're going to have to believe that I know what I'm doing, that if you have an issue, talk to me, and then I'll talk to staff. If there is an issue, it won't go unanswered. It won't, I won't just, blow it off and say, oh, one person thinks there's a problem. Well, if one of you thinks there's a problem, damn it, there's a problem. Because you guys are elected, and I need to respect your role. So I think if we, in time, get to know each other a little better and earn that trust and respect, I think it's going to become natural. Because I know for staff it'll be natural. Because I think they organically understand and appreciate their role. And part of my job then is to help the two parties kind of coexist. It needs to be, 2 + 2 = 3, because the council's wishes and desires need to be carried out by staff, and staff needs to realize that they're appreciated and they're listened to, and their wisdom and their experience and their knowledge is valued by me and by all of you.
Can you expand on the role itself? What is the clarity of roles, and does staff, in your experience, does staff understand the clarity of their role and councils understand the clarity of their role? So describe the roles of each, if you could.
The role of council is to clarify policy, to establish policy, to clarify policy, to establish priorities. That's the role, and we do that in public. We do it sitting around the dais. We do it on TV. because that's the way it works. So the role of council is to respect and honor each other and realize that you need to establish policy, not institute policy, establish policy. And then staff's role is to carry out policy. And my job is to be sure that one does not cross over into the other. Staff might have an opinion on what policy should be. Well, they need their opinions, need to say to themselves, because if they want to express their opinions, run for office. Their job is not to form policy. Their job is to institute policy. So I think there is a clear distinction between the two roles, and I have immense experience in helping everyone understand and everyone flourish, realizing that the responsibilities and the roles don't cross over. So you'll be able to carry out your role completely, and they'll be able to carry out their role completely.
Thank you.
So we've got a little under 4 minutes left, so I'm going to ask a pair of questions here just to make sure that we get this information. First, I want to offer up any time that you might want to tell council anything else that we haven't asked. And then I think we'd like to know if you're selected for this position, when you would be able to start.
Okay. Starting the last part, my wife and I, for about the last year, we've been slowly preparing our house for sale. You don't know this, but one of the things, I love home improvement projects. Years ago, I mean, we're talking years ago, I wanted to take a walk-in closet and turn it into a bathroom. I called 3 contractors, no one showed up. So I go, how hard can it be? You know, there's TV shows for this, there's books for this. And over the years, I've built probably 4 or 5 bathrooms, and I've added on to homes, and there is no trade that I'm not somewhat ill-equipped to do. And through that time, I've also found out that for some reason, I have a hard time putting that last piece of baseboard in. I have it. And so in our coat closet, 3 of the 4 pieces of baseboard are put in, and the 4th one is in there and leaning up against the wall. So many months ago, we started making a list of the things that I needed to get finished in order to sell the house. So our intention is to put the house on the market probably in May, because that's obviously the best time to put the house on the market. And so depending on the speed by which the house sells, everyone hopes that cars will start screeching into your driveway and people will throw money at you hand over fist. That isn't always the case, and even though everyone has pride in their home and think that is literally worth more than the market thinks it's worth, we believe we have a very marketable house, so we hope to sell our house rather quickly. But in the meantime, our intention is that I would actually come down here ahead of time. And today I went over and toured a couple of places and had the brochures, and so I'm going to be going home tonight, and Gretchen and I will be sitting around kind of looking at the pictures and figuring out where the furniture can go. So that we have a short-term plan, which is to get me down here relatively soon, and then the long-term plan is to get the house on the market and then move down here full-time.
So is there anything else aside from your handyman skills that you want to let the council know about?
I want this job. I want to be your next city manager. There's no doubt in my mind. And I think I'll be one heck of a good city manager. I like to say I've been there, I've seen it, I've done it. But again, every community is unique. But I think I have seen enough and done enough to be able to bring skills to this job and expertise to bear to make Sammamish what our citizens and what you want it to be. So I want the job.
We have about 23 seconds left, and I have 2 days on, so we're only able to take 1 very quick question.
So you said relatively soon, but I'm sorry, that's not actually very specific. I mean, when you say relatively soon, can you be a little more specific about when you could start?
When you make a decision Tuesday night and I get a phone call Wednesday morning, I'm assuming that there'll probably be an email attachment with a draft contract. It'll probably take a few days or so to hammer that out. And then my home improvement little body is going to be wiggling its way down here to Sammamish.
Well, thank you on behalf of the entire council. We appreciate your time, energy, in coming down here over the last couple days to engage with us, with our residents, and with our staff. So thank you.
I have truly appreciated it. Having looked at the city from like everyone else did on the internet and put together the 3-ring binder that I'm sure everyone else did as well. I know I've said this before, but I've been more than pleased to actually find out that what I thought was good is actually great. So I appreciate your time, and I appreciate you going through this process. It's not easy. It's a big decision, and I don't envy you Tuesday night.
Thank you.
Thank you. We are going to ask a series of questions. We'll kind of go up and down the dais as we ask our questions here. Thank you again for joining us for a second evening. We appreciate your time here this evening. Well, with us though. So anyway, so let's get going. We'll have 50 minutes. There is a clock right here that'll kind of help keep us on time. So if you would, please provide the council with a brief review of your background and experience and why you feel you're the best candidate for this job.
Well, first off, thank you, Mayor and councilors, for inviting me up here. This has been an extremely exciting opportunity to come up and learn more about the town of Sammamish. As you can see, I'll focus primarily on my relevant experience, which was working for the city of Centennial in Colorado. Centennial was a newly created community in 2001, very similar to Sammamish. It is on the southeast side of the Denver metropolitan area, and it was plagued with a lot of the same issues that Sammamish is dealing with. And when I talked with Councilor Moran yesterday, we talked about being founding fathers and founding mothers of the community and some of the work that had to go into creating the community. So there's a lot of work, there's a lot of history that needs to be respected as to why you're moving forward and the kind of the underlying condition of the community that you accepted really from the county. So that leaves you with a lot of challenges. I have a master's degree in public administration. I've spent the majority of my career in local government, ranging from finance preliminarily, and then also economic development. And finally, as a city manager for the city of Centennial. I've also been an interim city manager in Miami, Oklahoma. And since then, I've been working on downtown development and in local government contracts, public-private partnerships. I am a credentialed manager, however, that has lapsed, but I have the professional experience for that credential. I think for the most part, what I would like to do is share with you that I believe that I have the experience in what I consider you a newly created community. I have the experience in building the partnerships that a community like Sammamish needs, and really kind of the contract governance model that you all have undertaken over the past 20 years.
Very good. Councilmember Stewart.
Sure. So you mentioned finance, so why don't we just jump right into that? What's your philosophy for developing and implementing a budget for a city?
Well, I'll tell you, that's really how I started my career, is in public finance. And I think that a good, strong, fiscally responsible government is really the economic health of your community. So it's not always easy. The community has a lot of overarching needs and really desires. You have a lot of under kind of projects that have started that are underfunded, and you have a lot of planning that you need to do for the infrastructure projects. I think that it kind of depends on how you manage your budget, but for the most part, in my history, has been really solely on your governmental operations and on the city service side, but then equally making sure that you have the funding available for your capital projects. You have a long laundry list of transportation improvement projects and capital projects for parks that you're looking at. So I think it's a fine balance. It also, in an economy, a healthy economy, is really a balanced financial picture. And that would be looking at all of your revenue sources. So for the most part, you have just really to ensure that you have a diversified revenue base.
Deputy Mayor Moran.
My voice hasn't gotten much better from today. So. What do you do when your views and those of your staff differ from the governing body as a whole?
Very good question, thank you. And that will happen a lot. I will just simply say that it is, it's very difficult. You have a large constituency that every single one of you represent, and there are some loud voices and some quiet voices out there. The staff really is here to serve. We are the implementers of the policy. I truly believe if you have a common goal, you have common vision, and you have clarity in that vision, you should be able to limit the confluence where you're not coming together on issues. So I think it is important to have clarity on that. You're going to have upsets. You're not going to be able to communicate through them all, but it's really finding the common ground and making sure that you all have the same purpose. I think we talked a little bit last night about the concentric circles and really finding that common interest so that you're working towards the same goal.
Councilmember Ross.
Hi, Jackie.
Hi.
What are the two most significant accomplishments in your career, and what was your role in those accomplishments?
Thank you. A couple of things. One was my work at the City of Centennial. This was a community not dissimilar to Sammamish, but it was a community that was new. They had some fundamental issues with their financial picture. They had solicited the vote of the people and basically said, we're not going to raise your taxes. We're going to be a virtual city. We're going to provide limited service government and in perpetuity. So by the time I got there, they were about 4 years into the making of that environment and those promises, only to realize that they didn't have the money really to do that. So what we ended up doing is really taking a step back and doing a community visioning process, which you all have heard me communicate, and it was an opportunity for us to listen to the voices of the community. And I apologize, apparently I didn't get my phone turned off there, so. It was really an opportunity for us to go out and listen to the community. And we had over 100,000 in population. And although they were built out at different points in time over a 20, 30-year period, we had this kind of division of the East and the West, and they never communicated. And we sat down and we had over 800 people participate in our community visioning process. We had over 3,000 people responding to our surveys, which for a city that's really diverse, it was really important to reach out and hear them so that you're not just listening to a handful of voices in the community, but you're really gathering evidence from the balance of the community as to where they want to be. Do they want to be good or do they want to be great? And we heard from the community they wanted to be great. So we sat down with over 60 people on small small committees that we built together. They were key element committees after we went through the visioning process. And then those 60 people took the step back and they started building out tasks and action plans so that there was an opportunity to really build and while we were going through that process, communicate with the public what it was we were hoping to achieve. So we went through that community visioning, and it was our voice, our vision, Centennial 2030, so it was a long-term vision, and it really gave us direction. We built with that as kind of the foundation of what we were doing. We built all of our performance metrics around that. And our budget was built into that process as well. So we really knew where the focus was, and then each city council and each budget process that we went through every year, we were able to tie it back to our successes, report out to the community. So I think that was a tremendous opportunity, and it really gave us good direction and forward momentum. I would say the second best thing I've probably done in my career is in my first month working with the City of Centennial after the visioning process was taking off, and the community was saying, we need a regional product, a retailer like IKEA. Well, I had already started conversations with IKEA. So within the next year, we spent the time vesting the property in secret, which took a tremendous amount of trust from the city council, because in those environments, you're not really allowed to talk about it all publicly. But we vested the property, and even through the recession, IKEA opened, albeit it took full 4 years. That for us was the biggest find for the area, and the Front Range, everybody was clamoring for that because 415,000 square feet of new money for a community that was really struggling. So it was good.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Hi, Jackie.
Hi.
Thanks for being here yesterday and today. Hope we've given you a good time. Interesting city, huh? Wanted to ask you about, you touched on this a little bit, but Centennial being part of a kind of the larger Denver metro area, we have kind of a unique situation here in Sammamish as far as where we are regionally, how we're kind of tucked away, touching some other jurisdictions. Can you talk about how you've worked with other local jurisdictions, state government, whatever it may be, to try to build those relationships? I know you did a little bit in your consulting as well to try to create not just public-private, but public-public partnerships to help us recognize that, we are a regional player, and how have those been effective in your past, and how do you see that playing out here?
Yeah. Well, in a metropolitan area, you have to have partners, and in Centennial, because they were created so late in the game, not only did we have mega partners that we had to worry about, we had over 100 underlying special districts, HOAs, master districts, special districts. We had, at one point in time, 3 fire districts. We ended up with 2 library districts, 2 park and recreation districts. So we had a series of underlying services that were being created. We also had a need for authorities, not dissimilar to what Sammamish is doing with the fire department. And we created a Southeast Stormwater Authority, and that was in partnership with Arapahoe County. And that had been a tenuous relationship. So it remained tenuous for a little while, but it ended up being a good decision for everybody. We ended up with some pretty big water districts on part of the community, on one side of the community. I think from my perspective, it's a little bit of both. I think the city manager plays a role, a very large role, but I also think that the city council plays a large role in that. Your leadership does. And that's part of the policy-making body, and that's part of your role is to interact with, I believe, with the other commissioners, the other organizations that are the partners. So I think it's really having an agreed-upon direction and then starting those communications. If communications shut down, then you're going to be in a world of hurt. So you really need partners, in particular for emergency management. That's a critical element, but yeah.
Thanks.
Sure.
Great. With your experience, I'm sure you've had some controversial issues. So what I'm asking is for 2 examples, one where you had a good result and one where the result may not have been what you had hoped, or a bad result, if you want to call it that, and what you've learned from those 2 examples, and how you apply that and bring that to City of Sammamish.
Well, well, there's always issues. So, but some of them can get out of hand and relatively quickly. We did have an issue with bees, and we had probably 100 people show up at the city council meeting in beekeeper suits, And
Oh, boy.
and that was interesting. I mean, it was something that when you were going through a land development code and you're talking about what's allowed and what's not, are you going to allow chickens? Are you going to allow people to keep bees in their backyard? You better be having a lot of community discussion about that. And we had a little oversight on that, and we hadn't really reached out. So I have to be honest, I never thought about how bees impacted the world as much as I learned through that. So it really was an opportunity once that happened to sit down, go back. You can always go back, and you just open the conversations and you just listen to what the issues are. On both sides, actually. And then we created a committee, and they sat down and they talked about what's tolerable and how we could build consensus around the resolution on that. To be honest, I cannot remember exactly how that ended, but it was, you know, you never expect 100 people in beekeeper suits to show up. So it was fun. The other issue, which was yet another oversight, but there was limited impact that we could make, and that was telecommunications towers and placement of those towers. And it was very difficult for people to understand that you have a federal law that supersedes your authority. And so there was a clamoring because at a local level, residents want to be protected, and they look to our city council to give them that protection. But it's beyond that, and so it really was an educational opportunity, really for everybody, and even staff. I mean, we learned a whole lot more about cell towers and about federal laws with regard to cell towers than we'd expected.
Okay, thank you.
Sure. Councilmember Valderrama.
For the record, 9-10 years ago, we had a rooster chicken problems in our city, and we had a go-to council member assigned to those before my time. Thank you, Jackie, for coming out here. Most of you, if not all of you, had talked about the concerns of economic development and community balance. And now that you've had the opportunity to see our city, talk to our staff and council members, I'd like to know how you would go about managing the achievement of this in our city.
That's a very good question as well. So I think, as I've mentioned over the past week actually, is that it's wonderful to see the city taking the steps forward, I think, for the Town Center project. It's great for a couple of reasons. One, it helps with that revenue diversity. It helps with the fiscal balance. So I think that's important. It's not to say that when you are moving towards projects like that, you can do them in isolation of understanding the impact, transportation, schools, whatever the impact is. So I'm a true believer that when you do mega projects, that you also do a fiscal impact model. You look at the overarching revenues, you look at the ROI to the community, you look at what services you need to provide, and you look at your physical build out on that.
I'm sorry, what was the last one?
Pardon, physical build out.
Okay.
When we put IKEA in, it went into a very big regional area, but it was surrounded by office. And at 5 o'clock every night, the office let out, and we were going to inherently have conflict. Also, there was great concern of the way that their lights in the parking lot would be lit and what the stormwater was going to be and the noise from the increased traffic. And you have to look at all of that. It's all really critical elements, and it's a great way to sell it to the community is to have answers for that. So I think for the most part, it's planned growth and planned development, and it's having, as I mentioned earlier, it's having that goal, that commonality, that object that you're all trying to reach for, and making sure that you're doing it in a planned fashion, not postponing it, but planning it for the next generations that are coming in.
Councilmember Stewart.
Sure, thank you. Can you tell us about your core values and how those values determine how you manage or how you will manage our city?
Well, I think, our intrinsic values, which is just probably a blunt honesty on occasion. I would hope always, but not as blunt always. I think that it is hard to say, but I think that I work very, very hard. I have a very strong core work ethic. I live very, very hard, and I mean that in a positive way. My family is pretty much everything to me. My golden retriever, Mac, and my husband, he's not second fiddle to Mac. They are important.
This is being taped.
You want to wave to Max?
I could be in big trouble right about now. So. I think that a core value that I have is to really enjoy life and to not make it so serious that you don't have a good time at what you're doing. So yes, family, a good family work balance, good strong work ethic, and just being very interested in positiveness. I think that's a core value for me.
Very good. Deputy Mayor Moran.
Thank you.
How do you manage a city with a council that can be sometimes deeply divided and sometimes a little dysfunctional?
You know, it's going to happen. I think if you're not aligned with a goal, it's going to distract people, and it will create constant and continual division. It will also create mediocrity. So one of the things that I would do is to really take a step back with everybody and see if you can find that commonality, that center core. You all work enormously hard, and you should all be very respected for the work that you're putting in as leaders of this community. So I don't think anyone up here has a desire to do anything that's harmful to the community, nor does the staff. The staff is very professional, and they want to do a good job. They all recognize that they serve the community of Sammamish equally as much as you all do. So it's really sitting down and saying, what's center to your being? Do you want, again, I'll say this, do you want to be good or do you want to be great? Do you want that flywheel moving forward? Do you want that forward motion? Do you want to be recognized for your accomplishments as a community and as an organization? Or does a community want to languish? This would be for any community, not necessarily this community. So sitting down and really focusing on what's core to your being on the city council today, or for those of you that may be running for election in the future. What are you hearing from your community? And is that something that you really want to achieve collectively? So as I mentioned yesterday, it may take going into a dark room with boxing gloves. and the hope is that you come out and you have a group hug at the end and you are all staying focused moving forward. It's really, from my perspective, I think we also talked about this, is that people don't want to see the divisiveness. The community wants to know that you have their best interest at heart and that you're going to keep moving forward for their future.
So I'm curious about why you want to leave your current situation, move from sunny Colorado, because I can assure you it's not like this all the time here, having been a Colorado girl myself. Why Sammamish? What makes this the fit for you?
Well, I think I have to tell you that when I first looked at the job brochure, two things. One, the similarities and the dissimilarities with Centennial, and that I have the experience in contract governance, so I was intrigued by that. The other thing that I found intriguing, and I hope that it is true, is that this city council is looking for a partner. And that was a term that was used in the brochure, that you want a collaborator, you want a partner, and you want to move forward. That's what I heard. So that's why I was intrigued by that. It's a beautiful community. There's great potential here in Sammamish. And I think you all are dedicated and want to see things moving forward.
Very good. Councilmember Ross.
Thank you. In your short review of Sammamish, do you see anything that you think would require zoning changes? Do you think zoning changes would be positive, and what kind of changes would you think in the community like ours?
Actual zoning, and I haven't sat down and gone through your development code, land development code in detail, but I think the one thing that I've noticed, and this is historic, is that you have a tremendous amount of cul-de-sacs and small neighborhoods. You have this topography that has kind of created some of that. I think that the fact that you've got the town center is great. I was a little confused why it's in the position it's in, but now people have explained with the town center commons and kind of that connectivity. I think that you do need, from my perspective, a few more commercial spaces. It's great that you're building the town center. If it's only 500,000 square feet of commercial, I do hope that people are looking at what type of commercial you're putting in there. Are they service only? Is there going to be revenue generation from that? So that, again, is the balance of that. Also look at a handful of other small neighborhood. I have not found yet, although it may exist out there, but a place to put an annex from Microsoft or an annex from some major corporation, so the industry, and I don't mean heavy smokestack industry, but industry and jobs, appear that there's not much land or opportunity for that. So I would spend a little more time researching that, trying to figure out where you might be able to increase jobs, try to keep people here in the community so there's not this mass exodus every day.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Thank you. Jackie, we have given our age and your experience with Centennial, so we are, and you mentioned this before, and I just kind of brought to mind that there's maybe some similarities, and I just kind of want you to speak to this about the way we are a collection of neighborhoods here, and we're kind of at that stage as a city, at least from my perspective, that we're starting to form a collective city ideology or mindset or personality. And given your experience in Centennial, how did that work? Were you part of that process, and how do you view that happening, and how do you reach out to individual neighborhoods and get them to buy into some larger Sammamish visions, and did you do that kind of thing in Centennial, and what worked and what didn't work, and can you speak to that a little bit?
Yes, and somewhat. I'll move this process along quickly. It's really complicated to do that when you do have this collection of neighborhoods, and some of them are very small. So if you don't have an HOA or a neighborhood watch, and you don't have that means of being able to just reach out to the neighborhood watch captain and say, hey, give me the list of all of these people, then it may be getting the feet on the street and going out and talking to those people. Also, you have the luxury today, which we didn't even have really 8 years ago in Centennial, which was the social media. And so it's really using those tools that you have in the toolbox to reach out. I believe that the city councilors can go door to door. You've got elections coming up. You probably have councilman or women coffees with your constituencies. It's reaching out to your churches. It really is feet on the street and going out and trying to arouse people's interest. And if you're asking their opinions, I speculate people are going to want to participate in that if you're truly going to hear what they have to offer. So there's a lot of tools to be able to reach out to them. And the hope is that you offer them something back, that they start seeing that they can make a contribution to the community, and then they will have a desire to participate in what you're doing. We did that in Centennial, even though we didn't have all the tools. We went to all the parks and we set up these pop-ups, really, for the most part, and sat at the trailheads and talked to people when they came in. You sit outside a church with their permission, and you, on Sunday mornings, you poll people and ask them what they think. And then you make sure you have that good feedback loop to get that back out to them. Also, your community events that you're doing are critical. That's an opportunity to really speak to folks.
Councilmember Hornish.
So Jackie, you mentioned social media. I want to go there and kind of get your thoughts on that. As a city manager, what is the role that the city manager should play in social media as to with the constituents from the city's point of view? And what role would the city manager should the city manager have as to advising, if any, to the council members as to what role we have and how we play in the social media? And if you think there is a role for the city manager, what would that advice be?
Okay. When I believe this, when you are representing the city government and you are in the social environment, social media environment, you potentially put the city at risk with things you may say, actions you may take, and I think that's concerning to me. So I think that, albeit nobody ever wants to say you don't have a First Amendment right, I think there is a lot of training that needs to go into what you say, and how you're interacting. I believe that the city is working on a social media policy, and that's going to be a pretty critical discussion because people want that free flow of information. But you have a communications expert in the city today, and I think a lot of the city governance should be communicated through her. And there's caution with every message that goes out so that we're not violating any Open Meetings Act, you're not violating any Open Records Act, you're just following really the law. And it may be the basic information, but it's transparent and it's out front and it's out first. And my belief is you can get into the muck on a whole lot of social media and you can start a whole lot of debate that really shouldn't be occurring. And so from my perspective, I wouldn't do it. I don't do it, except my own. And it's mostly pictures of my dog, Mac. So it is, I think. Not showing preference. Yeah. So it is, I think there's caution. People, and there's a fine line between what you do personally and what you do professionally. And for the attorneys in the room, you know that risk. So.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Jackie, having met the staff, the council, been around our city now for a week, what do you see are the greatest challenges to this role in making us a real community?
Well, I think that's pretty good question. I think you have, like I said, very similar yet very dissimilar physically. You have very similar and very dissimilar situation to my experience in Centennial. I think your transportation products, basically your infrastructure, is really needing a step back. I believe, from what I've heard, you are, as a city council, as city staff, it seems like you have this long list of projects, but there's no apparent goal that you're reaching for. So I do believe that having a transportation master plan is a primary document, and you're probably, in my opinion, 20 years behind in having that. And that gives you a goal to be moving forward. It is frightening when you start looking at the numbers for the improvements that need to be done. I'm sure that that's frightening. And so aligning your fiscal resources with the physical needs of the community is a challenge. I also believe that the perception of divisiveness is something that this council and the city staff need to work on collaboratively. It is what the city council had said, again in the brochure, was you want partners. Your city staff should be your partners in being able to implement the vision that the community has and really the strategic direction and policy that this council sets.
Thank you.
Councilmember Stewart.
Oh, we're going around again.
We have more time. You don't, if you don't have another question, it's fine, or you can ask those last pair of questions if you'd like, and we can open it
I
up.
think there's actually one more that we
Okay.
haven't hit.
Go ahead.
That would be, can you give an example of an organizational restructuring that you initiated? What was the reason for that restructuring, and was it successful? And would you do anything different if a similar situation were to present itself again?
Right. My example of that is actually the city of Centennial contracted out over 80% of our city services, from law enforcement to animal control, for the most part. Our public works department was completely contracted out with one major contractor. When I arrived on scene at the city of Centennial, we had a contractor for land development review, land use planning, that had really been kind of floundering. The bills were coming in and the work wasn't following behind it. And so we took the step to first assess all of the invoicing that came through. We did find that there had been some pretty significant overbillings in that contract. We also took the opportunity to take a step back and look at that entire contract. Were we in the position of being able to do any or all of that service in-house? One thing that we always did at the City of Centennial is look at our service levels, who was producing it, and we would, if we had a contemplation that we were going to bring that service in, we actually had to bid it internally ourselves, using a lot of the same modeling. So it really was incumbent upon us to go back through and do a cost allocation for every service that we were doing, so that we were competitive with all of the other bidders in that. We ended up in the situation of our land development, our building inspection. We brought that whole focus in-house after pretty intensive process that we went through for selection. And there were a lot of people in the community that were unhappy about that, because you were taking a big shift from going from a big contract service city to suddenly bringing, a multi-million-dollar budget in-house. So it was an opportunity for us to sit down, educate. We had to defend our numbers. We had to defend the competitive nature of that, so that people didn't feel that there was some advantage given to the city. And when we brought it in, we really had to focus with the city council on our efficiencies and the effectiveness of what we were doing. We had a pretty bad reputation in the development community, and we were not being timely in our development reviews. And we had to spend a great deal of time working with the development community, builders, and talking through a lot of those issues. What was working for them, what wasn't working for them, and then how we could roll that out together. It took us probably a good 6+ months. And then we ended up also we brought in a pretty big, it wasn't enterprise-wide, but it was a pretty big product that we brought in to help us with the development review. When I mean a software product that helped us with all of that. We continued to contract out building inspection, animal services, and code enforcement. But the rest of it, the development review and land use planning, we all brought in-house. It was a pretty big restructuring for us. Oh, gosh, yeah. Yeah, very, very much so. It was not my first choice, to be honest. It was when you have a community telling you, we want to stay contract, then I think you have to really put up you have to defend yourself every turn you take on that. And I was not convinced we could do it. But we had the right people in the right place, and we were just moving forward, and it worked out very well.
So we have about 13 minutes left. Deputy Mayor Moran, do you have any other questions, or do you want me to? Okay, so let me get to those last two questions that are on our list, and then if there's additional time, which I assume there will be, we can go for another round here. Want to offer you the opportunity to tell us anything that we haven't already asked, and then we'd like to understand what your timeline is should you be chosen for this job. How quickly would you be able to assume the role here?
Mm-hmm. First off, I thank you. This has been a great week. I came up early in the week to kind of get a feel for the community. I have met, as you know, with pretty much all of the city staff. I missed a few, I'm sorry about that, but I tried to get them all in there. We took tours with the city. You've done a really great job in preparing your future manager for the community. So I think that's great. Also, meeting with all of you individually yesterday was delightful, so I appreciate your time on a Saturday night to do that. And I really don't have any other questions at this point in time, so I'll let you off the hook on that.
So the timeline, assuming if you were chosen for the role, how quickly would you be able to assume that
Right.
here?
Well, as you know, we do live in the state of Colorado, in northern Colorado. We do have 2 homes that are currently on the market. One that my husband just finished building. He's kind of a one-off builder, and so we've got that on the market. And then we do have a patio home in the city of Longmont that we've got on the market as well. So there would be some transition with that, but it actually could happen relatively quickly. You never know. We've been together 36 years, owned 17 homes, so we travel light. We don't have children, except for Mac. And it could actually happen pretty quickly for the most part.
So just to get clarity for council, if the homes do not sell, are you able to get up here before they close?
Yes.
Okay, thank you. Does council have any additional questions? Councilmember Valderrama.
So I'll follow back. You answered some of this before with boxing gloves, but most of the council, if not all, had asked or cited a concern about that unified vision that we had spoken about. And now that you have met with the staff and council, how would you go about and manage the council and staff for its achievement?
I like the fact you think your city manager manages the council. I like that a lot.
It's achievement.
We're going to have fun. Well, I think it's obvious that this city council body and right now your organization feels fragile. There's a misalignment. And so I think sitting down together and first off, sitting down with every single one of you again and again and again individually, and then collectively, and then learning the city staff, the issues that they're up against, making sure we're communicating that back, doing the boxing gloves, and I would not bring real live boxing gloves into a room.
I'm good with
It's
that.
might be kind of Yeah, somebody's going to get hurt. I just know that. So I think it's really just spending the time to try. And I believe that if all 7 of you say we want to be great, that you can collectively focus on being great. I know your staff wants to be great. I've heard that for the past week, that they want to be great. They want to do great things for this community. I don't think most of them, and I greatly doubt any of you, want to kind of wallow in mediocrity. So it's really just, if you're committed to that, then I see that you can move forward.
Councilmember Hornish.
I kind of gleaned from what you said, and I hadn't quite picked up from the materials, that you had to kind of figure out how to get the revenue in Centennial. Is that correct?
Yes.
How would you go about, what did you do there as far as getting the revenue that the city needed, and how would you go about assessing that, figuring that out to help us determine the best way to do that here, if we need to?
Yeah, that's excellent question, because when I first got there, they'd already done the heavy lifting to go back to the community and ask for an additional sales tax. In Colorado, sales tax is everything, and it is, in most communities, it's probably upwards of 70% of their budgets. Property taxes are very low. Local governments get no income taxes at all. You get things like cigarette tax, not different from what you get here. You get building permit fees, and you have all those incidental fees, which can be cost recovered, obviously, but you've got to look at the big dollars. The difference here is your dependence on property taxes. So the question is really understanding what the volatility will be and planning. What's the next 20 years look like with your housing stock, with your commercial development that you have? And what will that revenue, that one revenue, which is your largest revenue, look like now? And then what are your other opportunities to build out your revenue base? To me, it's really building a diverse revenue base, making sure you don't have dependency on one. When the country went through the recession in 2008, every city was going through major layoffs and major cost or service reductions. So I'm sure it was probably similar up here, but it was hard because the businesses were closing left and right, and even though we had IKEA on the table, they weren't open. And so you can't count on that. We looked at annexations. Right around where IKEA was planned, we went in and we took 140 acre development in, which the city had been hesitant to do when they were created. They didn't want to go in with those bigger parcels because they needed their vote really for the incorporation. So we went back, we worked with that developer and the businesses in that area, and we talked about the need and what the service level could be for them coming into the city. So we brought in another $3.5 million in revenue into the city. So it's really holistically looking at, number one, you kind of have to do an overlay with your land use, and then you have to look at that fiscal. You have your land use down here, and then you kind of overlay the fiscal picture on top of it. And where are your gaps, and what can you fill, and how can you fill it? So, long story.
I don't see any additional questions from council. Going once, going twice. Okay. No takers. So Jackie, thank you. We very much appreciate the time and energy you've put into traveling to Sammamish, driving around, time with us, time with staff, and with our residents as well. So thank you. We really appreciate it.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
Thank you. Thanks.
I think I was your quickest one.
That's okay. We like that.
And I thought I talked a lot. That's the important part.
Jason, did you see the Michigan State score? Yeah. Oh, you did? I didn't see the end of it. That was a bummer. I hadn't seen that.
What happened to the Huskies? They are getting in the NCAAs, or have you announced
They
it
did,
yet?
but they lost.
Yeah.
Yeah, they got killed by Oregon yesterday.
Tournament, Pac-12 tournament?
Yeah, they got beat by Oregon. Okay, certainly we're not here to talk basketball, although that would be fun. It is, I know, I was checking it. The brackets are done already. We're a 4 seed. Okay, so thank you, Mr. Larson, for joining us one more day here in Sammamish. The weather is beautiful, so we appreciate you giving up a beautiful Sunday afternoon to be with us here today. We are going to ask you a series of questions, and we'll just kind of run up and down the dais. We have 50 minutes in order to do that. There's a clock over here that'll kind of help keep us on track. Okay. So I will jump right in. If you would, please provide the council with a brief review of your background and experience and why you are the best candidate for this job.
Very good. Thank you. I'm currently the city administrator of Sammamish, Washington. I've been there since 2004. I lead 8 departments. We're a full-service city, so it includes police and fire, all utilities, as well as the usual other customary departments. And I also manage the day-to-day operations, including 120 employees. I believe I've got the skill and experience that would transfer well to Sammamish. The city has a general fund budget of $40 million, $24 million in utilities. That includes wastewater, potable water, stormwater, and reclaimed water for irrigation. We actually reclaim all of our wastewater and put it back into our irrigation system, as well as golf course. Sammamish also contracts for services. We have right-of-way maintenance on our major arterials. We have landscaping maintenance contracts. We have engineering contracts for design and construction management. We also have some legal contracts, particularly for human resource issues, as well as labor contracts. We have a municipal court contract. We have a prosecuting attorney contract, as well as we contract for human services in Snoqualmie. It's probably similar to other cities in the area, I believe, but we do not do any of our own human services. I've got also 8 years of city manager experience in Minnesota, including 2 different cities. One was my first city manager job, and I was their first city administrator. I was there for about 5 years, had a great time. And then I went on to a large metropolitan suburb of St. Paul. It was named West St. Paul. Did a lot of development, redevelopment there, as well as some park development. I've got a great passion for city management. I believe it's the service that's closest to the community, and it's on a day-to-day basis. You regularly see the results of your work, and it's obviously all those things that people expect that you provide, including the things I mentioned earlier about water and sewer, roads, parks, police and fire, all the things that I think a lot of folks, including myself, we kind of take for granted when we're dealing with the community. When I mentioned my skill and experience transferring well to Sammamish, I don't necessarily want to make comparisons, but I believe Snoqualmie is very similar to Sammamish. Our socioeconomic, our demographics are very similar. Our median age is in the low 30s. We've got a school-age population under 18 of about 35%. We've had a lot of growth issues there, including having to deal with the school district. We've also had issues with concurrency over the past several years. I believe some of the challenges that Snoqualmie faced are also facing this community. I read in the brochure some of the challenges that Sammamish is facing. I think they're very similar to my experience in Snoqualmie.
So we'll stop down at that end of the dais. Councilmember Valderrama.
Thank you, Rob, for being part of this process. Most, if not all, of the candidates had mentioned their concerns about economic development and the balance. Having now seen our city, having met our staff and the city council, how would you manage to achieve this balance?
I have seen the community. Living so close by, our kids played soccer up here quite a bit. My son also wrestled in middle school and high school. I know it's grown since that time, but both of them are out of high school now. But I've also spent some time up here going through the community. I think the most important, I've got a lot of experience in economic development. I've gone through the National Development Council. So I've got the background, I've got the experience, I've got the technical know-how, and I've also done quite a bit of development in Snoqualmie. The number one issue for me is ensuring that it's what the community wants and it's what the city council wants. I'm not going to forge ahead on a plan unless it's been approved by council. I think it's very important to meet the needs of the community. And if that entails perhaps engaging the community to create that vision of what it really needs or wants, maybe we already have a plan, but maybe it needs some revision. I don't know. But I'm looking forward to at least delving into that with this body and working with staff in a cohesive manner to achieve the results that the community expects and wants.
Councilmember Hornish.
Okay, Bob, I know you've been doing this for a little while, so I know you've had some controversial issues. So what I'd like to hear from you is a two-part question. First, a controversial issue that you dealt with that you had a good result, and secondly, that you had a controversial issue that wasn't so good as a result, and what you learned from both of those circumstances, and how you would bring that and apply it here in Sammamish.
Okay. Which one I should start with? Probably the more difficult one. We are currently working with the Snoqualmie tribe on a number of initiatives. We have a Riverwalk plan we'd like to execute. The urban growth area is tied closely in with the tribe's sovereign nation, and they've been buying up property in that urban growth area. They want to add to their tribal land. They have a casino up at the site right now, and they have some entertainment and restaurant. They want to expand on all of those things, including the gaming tables. We've had a contract with them, I believe, the better part of 15 or 16 years, just before I got on board, for mitigation for police and fire services, as well as sanitary sewer. We currently still have we retain the sanitary sewer contract. And we had a tough go with them about 4 or 5 years ago. When they started the casino, it was a 7-year agreement with us that we would provide those services, and then there had to be some type of transition. We had to see how it was going, what their needs were, what their expectations were, what the demand was, and we were supposed to renegotiate that contract. Didn't go so well, but in fact, the city got sued by the tribe in federal court on some issues there with the sanitary sewer. But we saw it through. I think the most important thing was to keep the communication open, continue to try to discuss these things with them. We did not necessarily want to be in court with the tribe. They sued the individual members of the council as well as several staff. We felt very strongly and passionately that we had a very good position. Of course, they felt the same way. And it actually ended up with in our favor. And that's the difficult part, because now you have two partners, if you will, or two folks or two sets of bodies are trying to work together, and there may be some animosity. We've since, I believe, for the most part, we still have some issues with them on some other development issues, as well as some, I mentioned the Riverwalk, and some conservation issues. But I think we've set this one aside. I think evidence of that is just last week, I believe on Wednesday, I've got a text or an email message from their tribal chairperson asking that they want to reopen the discussions on this sanitary sewer contract, which is going to be expiring at the end of 2020, which I think is very positive for us in that regard. They're looking at us now as another partner, and it's a huge trust issue. I found out with the tribe, it's very difficult because if you can imagine the expectations they might have or the experience they've had in the past dealing with the federal, state, and local governments. That was a successful one. Actually, excuse me, that was kind of a both, I guess. But I have not had really, other than that one, that was I call it the unsolvable riddle, but we're still getting through that. My other experiences, I've usually been able, through others, obviously working with council, working with the community, working with staff, and getting those resolved. There was one lingering one, I think one of you brought up last night, and I'll be happy to talk about it. We had an ethics violation. The first one in my entire career happened a couple of years ago with one of our department heads. It sank the morale heavily, especially with the colleagues of the department heads, as well as me, as well as the council and the community. And it was a very difficult period of time. I expect people to behave ethically. I expect them to be honest. I expect that they can be trustworthy, especially when you're dealing with local government. That's the way I operate myself. And I don't ever want to I want to make sure I'm above reproach. I don't want to ever have an appearance that there's even a sense of a conflict. This particular issue, the person went into a partnership with one of our consultants, didn't reveal it to us. We discovered it through the community, and we took decisive action. There had to be an investigation from a neutral third party. It was a very difficult time to go through, and I had to deal with that, obviously. I had to take some of the blame, so to speak, because of institutional issues. I was never at fault, but it was always, people expected us to know about this, and that was impossible because they kept it hidden, the two partners. And the person was disciplined, and we moved on from there. But it still has lingering effects with us. That's the part that I believe that's the tough one to get over, because we've got police chief, fire chief, community development director, all the different department heads, and they expect that they're going to behave themselves and not ever come into question over their behavior.
Very good.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Thanks. Bob, I'm a little familiar with Snoqualmie in as much as I know the city administrator, strong mayor layout with Matt Larson. Not related, I take it?
Correct. We're not related.
So transitioning from that, it's similar responsibilities, but actually different in a lot of ways too. So can you talk about how you would like to take your experience, and you did have some city manager experience in Minnesota, right? But 15 years in Snoqualmie as a city administrator, how do you view the transition from a city administrator with a strong mayor format to the format 7, strong-willed people on a council?
Sure.
And you have that there too, I'm sure. But how does that work for you? And How does that work for you? How do you feel that that transition, will it be beneficial? How, and will it be a hindrance? What do you think?
Sure. Well, I do have direct experience. It goes back quite a ways, but I would deploy some of the same strategies and management techniques and leadership techniques that I brought with to me from Minnesota. I have been doing that right now with the city of Snoqualmie. I am in charge of the day-to-day. The mayor is a part-time person. Fortunately for us, and I'll give you a couple examples why this is important, especially in this state, and it would be important for this council if I do become your city manager. Most of the groups or the governing bodies, for instance, Sound Cities, Puget Sound Regional Council, the state, the manager can attend all those meetings, but he does not have a vote. He or she will not have a vote, and I think you folks probably know that. So it's going to be very important for this council, from the leadership side, when I ask or I request that we can get you folks to come in and appear and put a plug in for the city when necessary. Because I can do that, but a lot of the times we just aren't able to sit at that table with the other electeds. That's the expectation. In the meantime, though, with the Snoqualmie, I work very closely, obviously, with the mayor, with the city council. The mayor is the elected chief executive, so he signs off on all the paperwork, all the contracts. I've had some authority with that, but it's no different as far as I'm concerned, because I have to recommend these things to the mayor. So I'm not saying he doesn't lift a finger without me saying so, but he's a very strong mayor, works really well with the council. I think it's a great team. In fact, I actually enjoyed it. It was a little bit more refreshing coming from when I came out of Minnesota for at least the first several years to be able to work directly with the mayor in a little different form of government. It made me pivot a bit about what my beliefs were and how you can get things done in a community. And folks back in Minnesota were suggesting to me that I might be stepping into something I may not necessarily do so well at, because we're all trained, if you will, in the idea that you're working directly with the council. But I have had that experience with the Snoqualmie Council on a regular basis.
Councilmember Russ.
Hi, Bob. What do you do when your views and those of your staff differ from those of the governing body as a whole?
Sure. I start out with, I did this when I was in Snoqualmie, I did it with all the other cities where I was at, but I bring them together, especially the department heads and senior staff. I put them together years ago, but they're still apropos to today. But there's 10 issues that they have to deal with and how to deal with the council. And they have to keep in mind the number one issue is the council makes the decisions. Now, the council may ask the staff and then the manager through partnerships and teamwork to suggest policies or to suggest things to council, but that's all it is. It's an agenda bill. And the council makes that vote. Doesn't matter what that vote is, but we have to implement that. And I keep having to remind folks that, they may have a strong professional opinion, but they have to be able to set that aside. And they have to remember when the vote's taken, that's the word of the community. That's how it is in a representative democracy. And there's, so I deploy techniques, if you will, or at least systems for staff to be able to weigh in on those things. It might be at a staff meeting. They might get frustrated over something, but I create a place where they can come and talk about it, talk it through, walk it through, and then obviously get back on board. But I don't tolerate. I think it's untenable that a staff member would think that they somehow have something over the council when it comes to decision making. They might have the greatest ideas in the world, but it comes down to the council has to make that decision. And they aren't necessarily, they can use persuasion if they can, but they're supposed to be obviously the professionals, the subject matter experts to advise the council.
Very good. If you would, could you tell us about your core values and how those values determine how you will manage the city of Sammamish?
It probably goes to my character. In fact, if you don't mind, I don't want to get this wrong because I already gave that information to you folks, but if I don't to look it up real quick. Where did I put it? My core values, and if you don't mind, I'm just going to read them because I want to make sure I get them straight. You need to have some pragmatism, be pragmatic. You need to be trustworthy. need to be generous as a city manager. There's a number of ways you can do that. I say this, but I also call it, bringing your light from underneath the bushel basket. I'm a fairly modest guy, and I am very humble. And I don't want to make it sound like I'm bragging about that, but you have to be as a city manager, because you learn something new every day. You could be 10 years in the business or 35 years in the business. You're going to learn from others, and you have to listen. You have to take note of those types of things. I'm also pretty intense. I have intense convictions, and I'm also very hardworking. I've got great stamina for this type of work. I regularly take care of myself, but I think those are the convictions that, for me, they work quite well and make it successful for me.
Deputy Mayor Moran.
How do you manage a city with a council that can be sometimes deeply divided and at times a little bit dysfunctional?
I don't have any of that experience. I would lean heavily on the council and the staff and the community. I can't do it alone, but I would ask the council. And there's where there's a will, there's a way. It sounds rather cliche, but it comes down to doing the greatest good for the greatest number of people in the community. And there could be any number of innovative ideas for council members and others to come up with about how to get the folks together to be more cohesive, how to, the unity of the council, and to, you're all great individual people. Obviously, getting together and having to make decisions on behalf of the community can be very difficult. There hasn't been a council that I've dealt with in my entire career that hasn't faced tough decisions and tough processes to get there. But it could be something as simple as getting together, maybe in groups of 2 or 3 or 4, maybe as a whole council, but going out and doing something besides conducting the business of the city. Maybe it's going to a human service provider and helping out for a day. I don't know what kind of time you folks have, but I think it's important for you to try to get to know each other better, perhaps. I'm just guessing. I'm not suggesting I didn't know anything what's going on with this particular council. I've heard a lot about it, but I'm looking forward to developing relationships with this council, individually as well as collectively. But there's some other ways to go about these things. I've dealt with councils in the past where they would always have a split vote. But at the end of the decision, if you will, when the vote was taken, there was an agreement they would move on. And it was so important. And I had a former council member, Charles Peterson, and I want to invoke his name because he's the first, he was in Snoqualmie. He was a mayor back in the 70s. He was a council member. He brought the library to town, brought the hospital to town. He was part of the Weyerhaeuser group. He was he was the head of the labor for the entire western states for the logging folks. He died in office, unfortunately, but he always reminded me, he said, there's 2 steps to this. He said, Bob, it's important that council, they to be not necessarily united, but they have to take the votes. But then if they don't move on from the vote, it obviously can create difficulties later on. You might be on the 4-3 vote, you might be on that 4 side one time, but you might be on the 3 side the next time. And it's important to try to do away with the personality issues, because he had it all. There was, if you can imagine, when the Snoqualmie Bridge was coming online, or at least when it was being discussed back in the 80s and early 90s, that community was going bankrupt. They were almost going to get ready to disincorporate. They had to do something. And that community did not want development. They did not want the ridge. They did not want the 4,000 homes and the commerce and the huge impacts on the school district and on the road systems and everything else. But they came together after a long and difficult process. But they were at least able to set aside their differences for the betterment of the community.
Councilmember Stewart.
How do you build strong relationships with other governmental levels, agencies, jurisdictions?
I'm pretty straightforward. I obviously, if it's going to be a negotiation or maybe some discussions with, say, a school district or, I don't know, who else might be, but just you take your pick, I suppose. But I would obviously develop the city's position that this council, after dealing with the community and others, would say, okay, here's what we want, here's our talking points, or here's our conditions, and send the staff and me into negotiations. And from there, I'm pretty strong about those things. I'm not intimidated by anything or anybody, and but I represent the city vociferously. And I don't. The key, though, for me, and I think my success, and also with staff, is that you can disagree when you're across the table from others, but don't ever become disagreeable. And I caught myself a couple times, in particular with, for instance, dealing with the Sammamish tribe, where it was right on the edge of being disagreeable, and I could see the trust breaking down rapidly. But that's how I go about it. It's very important to make sure that no matter how well I think the plan has been laid out, if I don't have the council interjecting on this thing, I shouldn't be going into those meetings.
Councilmember Valderrama.
Yeah, Bob, again, thank you. What do you see as being the greatest challenges to this role that you would be undertaking and making and building out a balanced community?
Sure. If you don't mind, I do believe that what's in this brochure is spot on. I believe this is probably, I hope, was developed with the council's input. I assume it has been. But I think before anything can get done, as far as what I'm concerned as being a city manager, I want to come in and work with the individually and with the council as a whole, work with staff, try to build a cohesive team, see where there's perceived weaknesses in staff, if you will, but also look at the challenges that are there, look at the strengths, play to those strengths as you can. And before you can get anything else, before you even start talking, in my opinion, you're going to have to get that team built up so that you can build up the trust. And then the other one is, I think it's been described all weekend as the concurrency issues. And Sammamish dealt with those on a regular basis. We had a master development agreement, but we didn't have the concurrency issues all hammered out with the developers. So we had to, that went on from the time I got there in 2004 all the way up until about 2009 and 10. We had a master developer, but there was obviously quite a few builders. There was commercial, there was retail involved, developers there as well. That took some time and negotiation. And I think that's what, if this community wants it, if they want that economic development, if they want the commercial development, I think it's important to at least get that plan laid out again. The one that we're challenged with right now in Sammamish is our communications to our community, and I happen to notice that it's also Sammamish's, but we're in the midst of a lovely person from the University of Washington is doing some research for a master's. She fell into our community by chance, and she's conducting a fairly extensive research on community engagement. And we allowed her and anybody else who wanted to be interviewed, we allowed her to interview everybody and anybody, didn't matter who it was. And I think she had dozens of people, if not hundreds. I can't remember what it was, but she had groups. And we're waiting for that report. I want to see what the results are. I want to look at our communications team. I want to take a look at what we're doing. We believe what we're doing rather well. We're not sure we're doing the things that our community wants us to be doing and how to engage those folks. That's critical. Especially now, I think the biggest challenge that I've seen in my entire career is communications with the community. Things have changed, I think, quite a bit in managing a city. That's probably the #1 issue over the last 10 to 15 years that I've seen.
Thank you.
And then the last one is the city's finances. I think because of your resources, I came into Sammamish, they had a lot of money coming in, a lot of revenues, but they didn't have a plan. We created immediately a baseline, and then each year we would build on that, looking at our expenditures, looking at our revenues, looking at our forecasting as we were developing, growing. We called it the cliff. It was always there. Eventually we were going to run out of development, and we wanted to stop it, obviously, at some point, and not create any more. But we had to come up with a plan for sustainability for the staff that we hired, for the services we were providing, It's top-notch service. I understand Sammamish has top-notch service as well. So you'll have to come up with some, we have to come up with some type of plan together to figure out how you want to do these things into the future as far as how to pay for them, how to sustain those quality services.
Councilmember Hornish.
Great. So Bobby just kind of mentioned communication, so I want to drill down on a specific type, social media.
Sure.
So what I'd like to better understand is your view on the role of a city manager in a weak mayor system as we have, as to the use of social media for him or her and the staff, as well as advice if you think it's appropriate for a city manager to advise the council members, and if so, what that advice might be.
I personally don't deal a lot with social media. I have a Facebook page, but it's mostly for my relatives and some closely held friends. So I wouldn't necessarily, unless, let me put it this way, I would start over. I really want to deal, or at least talk to the council about what your preferences are. I think I should not provide my advice to a council member or the council body about how to communicate with the public. I would like to come up with some thoughts, and perhaps you folks, as a team, if you will, could decide what you think would be the best way to go about that. And we'll go from there. But when it comes to communication to the community, you've got excellent staff to do that, and it really comes down to what that communication platform is, what the messages you're trying to convey. Again, as the council, you're going to have to represent the majority of that, as far as the character of the organization, the culture. I can help build it, obviously, with the staff, but I think it really has to come from the elected body.
Okay, very good. Thank you.
Councilmember Ritchie.
Thank you. Bob, we talk a lot in this community about livability and what that term means to different people. So you've had a lot of experience about creating a livable community in Snoqualmie. We are in one shape or form similar and different from that experience too in our own way, and I'm curious, specifically dealing with transportation and trying to get folks on and off the ridge, our plateau, right? You have 18, 202, 90. We don't connect to anything here, really, without working with other regional partners. So what has been your experience in terms of working with King County Metro or Sound Transit, or getting folks down the hill, down 202, past the falls, down to Redmond, or getting people, with 18, which is always scary, right? And then, just that whole experience. I mean, I'm sure you've had a lot of integration working with those state and local teams, but how do you envision that experience working with us when we don't have those relationships yet with our neighbors, and how do you envision that working and helping us?
Sure. Surprisingly, Snoqualmie's had its share of difficulties with those same bodies you just mentioned. We were overlooked, if you will, by the county, by the state. We got a state highway running through Snoqualmie, but the state doesn't want to put any money into it. We've been trying to redevelop the downtown, and we're using that corridor, so we're actually getting money from the state and the feds on some of that, and using some of our own money. But we want to make it more livable and more drivable, frankly, and it's just not right now. When I came on board, we had not much of a presence in the region, and so I think it's important that you establish relationships, even if you don't necessarily need anything from either party. But so when you're making the call, it's not a cold call, so you have to establish rapport. It could be any number, but you mentioned several. We obviously have to deal with North Bend, even Maple Valley, because they're on the other side of Tiger Mountain, and it's very important that we all support, if you will, if there's going to be any improvements done to Highway 18, that we understand what their issues are before we want to necessarily jump out there in front of our issues.
Yeah.
But we've also had issues with the state and the federal folks, because their idea about Interstate 90 is that they don't want to have that backing up in Issaquah, so they don't mind if it gets backed up along Snoqualmie Parkway. We'll tell that to our residents who are backed up for a mile on a 4-lane road, and it's very difficult. And so we're doing some improvements finally there. But we actually worked with the state and Maple Valley, as well as Covington, as we speak, on putting together some type of a temporary road access as they're improving the interchange right now to allow unfettered access for the folks coming out of Snoqualmie without having to being interfered with, or at least having to wait for the light at the SR 18, because it's right now it's a jumbled mess. And people are waiting for 15, 20 minutes. But I think it's very important to establish those relationships early and routinely talk to folks, even if it's not even an issue that you need to have resolved. It might not even be an issue. It might just be more of a relationship building.
Thanks.
Councilmember Ross.
What are the two most significant accomplishments in your career, and what was your role in those accomplishments?
I have several I would like to know, but I'll mention the one that's most recent for me, the two most recent ones. One is we have a Sigella Winery. It's a homegrown business in Snoqualmie. Right now they're split up between 3 different sites. They have a production facility in one area. They have their retail and kind of a small event space downtown, but they have really no large event space for their club members. The reason that's so important is that these folks told us 4 years ago, it's a family business. They've been very successful. They want to stay in Snoqualmie. We were trying to help them find a spot. We have a lot downtown. It's a parking lot. It's a vacant city lot, but King Street, infamous because folks think that we don't have enough parking downtown. The fact is we have plenty, but we wanted to keep them in town, so we have had the lot up for sale for quite a few years. About 2 years ago, they approached us, and they wanted to acquire it, and they have absolutely no experience in negotiating an agreement or a contract for this type of stuff. And so we brought them in. I think they were rather intimidated, but we treated them really well. We didn't cut them any deal, if you will. They didn't give it a bargain price. We said whatever that appraised value is, we're gonna set it there, and they agreed to pay it. But there was some complications because some folks just didn't want to see that go to development, even though 25, 30 years ago it had an old police station building on there. It had a gas station at one point. It had some other properties. So it wasn't like it was a vacant lot always. But that was a big one because this family, the fact they wanted to stay in Snoqualmie, it meant so much to them. For me and for the staff and for the council, it wasn't a large development issue, but it meant so much that we could retain this business. And they were ecstatic, and they still are. They got a small business administration loan. They worked really hard in getting their plans ready. I think they're probably going to break ground this year, but it's really exciting to see that happen because on that level, I've had it in the past, but not to the point where those folks were really sincere and genuine in their belief that they picked the right spot. We're pretty happy about that. Second one is when I got on board, I knew I had a older department head group, meaning they were obviously getting near retirement within probably 5 or 7 years, depending on which one you're talking about, but that was the entire group. I had to replace a city attorney, police chief, fire chief, community development director, city planner, who am I missing? Finance director. Almost complete turnover out of the 8. I think there's only one original person left, and I also hired a public works director years ago. That was a big challenge because we weren't necessarily looking for, we wanted obviously folks who had subject matter expertise, but we also wanted to develop the new team, if you will. And it was rather exciting, although it was exhausting. We did that all in about 4 years' time, but leading up to it, I insisted, and the council was actually part of this, because they wanted to make sure that we could sustain whatever was going on in those departments. So we came up with a succession plan for every one of those departments. And it got tweaked a few times here and there, but it pretty much was the original plans that I had those original department heads help me with and help the community and the organization take care of it. I have never had that in my entire career, having that kind of turnover. And it was very successful. We've got a great team right now, and we're thriving, and we get along, I think, quite well with the community and the council.
I've already asked 2 questions, so I'll skip over myself and move to the deputy mayor.
What is your philosophy for developing and implementing a budget for our city?
It starts with council's goals and objectives, the vision for the community. It has to have a base. That's absolutely paramount to any successful budget process. And it can include community members. I know we've done it a few times in my experience where we've talked about community standards for services. We did that with police and fire when was just 1 year into it in 2005 at Snoqualmie. There was a discussion about whether or not we should have our own police and fire, whether or not we should contract it out. And there was I would say, a community referendum at that time. Had a fairly large public gathering. 150 people showed up in our bay of our fire station, and they made it crystal clear to that council that they wanted their own police and fire. That was a great time, actually. But from there, the department heads would using the council's goals and objectives, align their budgets through the programming that they would do, and making sure that they hit on every one of those goals and objectives. Now, we were at that time, we were only doing annual budgets, but we eventually turned over to biennial. But we also looked past the 2-year. We looked at it, 4 and 6, and looking at our financial plan and saying, okay, you're going to do it for the next 2 years, but how is that going to get you how are you going to be able to layer that success onto the next couple of years and the next 2 years after that? And it's been very successful. I think that's the only, well, to me, that's the best approach to take.
Councilmember Stewart.
I think you may have answered this with your accomplishments, but talking about, have you ever, or can you give an example of an organizational restructuring that you initiated? What was the reason for that restructuring, and was it successful? And would you do anything differently if a similar situation presented itself again?
Sure. There is one, and in particular in Snoqualmie, it was our Parks Department. And when it was growing back in the, we didn't have a Parks Department, we had maintenance. We did not have Parks and Recreation. And so starting 2004 when I got on board, up until about 2011, I think, when we turned over, I can't remember the exact date, but there was discussion about is the city going to be offering recreational services? We've been doing parks maintenance as a separate department. We also had, through the mitigation for the properties that were being developed in Snoqualmie, money's coming in to pay for a community center. And so we had 2 or 3 referenda on that. The idea was we'd have a recreation program out of that facility. Didn't work out the way we planned. 3 referenda all got turned down decisively. So we pivoted, and we decided we were going to come up with some other way of doing this. And when we did that, we decided not to do our own recreational services. It was difficult. It was back and forth because the council was split. And what that would mean, obviously, is that we would not, we would have a smaller parks department. I proposed that we would combine the maintenance activities for Parks and Public Works, to cross-train these folks, obviously have a skill set that's much better. We have a smaller crew. There's probably, I'd say 15 employees total in the 2 maintenance departments, because we contract quite a bit of it out. That met with some resistance. But as we continued, it wasn't, like we touched upon this over 2-3 years. In fact, at one point, council had actually voted that we were not going to combine the departments, and then they came back a year and a half later and felt they should. Because we said we don't need 2 directors to oversee 2 maintenance departments. And so they agreed to combine them. That's been quite successful, actually. The other one was that we built the community center. Before we did that, we tried to decide who would be best to run it. Should it be the city? We said we don't really need that. We don't know how to do this. We aren't experienced at it. And every experience I had was such that it tends to have a supplement from the general fund. It doesn't pay for itself. It's a great community asset, but we felt we wanted to partner up with a provider that could augment it and actually add to it. And so we checked with Boys and Girls Club, Northwest Swim. We thought we were going to build a pool. We checked with Skyview Parks District out of North Bend. We also had this discussion on the side. I had mentioned a couple of times that my experience in the Midwest was heavy with experience with YMCA. Folks, that wasn't necessarily a great partnership because of the background it had. But as they learned more about the YMCA, it became obvious that the other 3 partners didn't want to do the facility without they didn't want to run the pool, turns out. it's a liability for them. But the YMCA decided they could, so we actually ended up with a partnership agreement. And I know it's a little bit controversial here. I don't know how it's working out, but I believe that Sammamish modeled their agreement for the YMCA here that was built at the community center after the Snoqualmie agreement. So. But that was the success stories, that we were able to combine those departments and not skip a beat.
So with the time we have left, I want to open it up to council members that might have any additional questions. Okay, I have no takers. So there are two final questions that I would like to ask, if I may.
Sure.
First, I want to offer you the opportunity to tell us anything that we didn't already ask that you'd want us to know. And two, if you were offered the position, how quickly would you be able to assume the role here in Sammamish?
Okay. Well, the question I was, well, maybe it goes without asking, but I'm here because I'm interested in the job. I'm very interested in the job. I'd be delighted to be selected as your next city manager. That said, I've got kind of a wrinkle, and that is our daughter. If you'd indulge me for a minute, she's got accepted for her doctorate program out in Boston. She has to be there for occupational therapy, yeah.
Very nice.
But we got to get her out there by sometime mid-May. And it's going to, I believe I could start the position perhaps sooner than that, but I'm going to need some time to get her on her way. I want her to be successful, and she wants us to help her get out there. But she's more than mature enough to do that, but she's moving away from home, and she's going to be gone for a while, so I want to make sure she's got a good experience. So that's the only wrinkle I could see. But as long as how long it would take, if I were selected and we were able to negotiate a contract within, you know, say, whenever you make the decision, I think I could be on board within 45 days to 60 days. I got to be fair to my organization. I'm leaving a lot behind, but I want to talk to them first. Obviously, they all know about it, but you never, you know, I know the mayor and council members and the staff are rather dejected I'm even sitting here, but it's just nice to know. But they also know they have to be realist about it. But so it could be sooner than that. I don't want to, you know, say it's got to be a hard and fast number of weeks, but I want to make sure that I take care of my business on the personal side as well as the professional side.
Fair enough.
Very good. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Bob. We really appreciate you coming down here several days in a row to meet with council, to meet with staff and our residents as well. And on behalf of the entire council, thank you very much for your time.
You're welcome. My pleasure. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Okay. I would entertain a motion to adjourn.
I move we adjourn.
Second.
Thank you. It's been moved and seconded. All those in favor?
Oh,
Aye.
Aye.
Fakes you out.
Aye. Aye.
Okay, by a vote of 7-0, we are now adjourned.